Eliza Thornton's journey in 1882, when promises were carried by the wind, hope traveled on iron rails, and a woman's worth was measured by the strength of her hands and the flush of her cheeks. Eliza Thornton, with her persistent dry cough and pale face, was deemed flawed goods by a man who had never laid eyes on her. But fate, like a mysterious guide, always finds a way to lead lost souls to where they truly belong, even if it means crossing the pain of abandonment on a train platform, with only a rejection letter and the sunset as companions. In the wilds of Montana, where dreams are forged with sweat and patience, Eliza's story is a ballad of resilience, unexpected kindness, and the strength of an unyielding heart. Before we dive into this journey, let me know where you're at, and if this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit that follow button, because tomorrow I've got something special prepared just for you. Winter in Willow Bend. Winter arrived early in Willow Bend, a tiny town nestled in a Montana valley, too modest to be called a city, but resilient enough not to be swallowed by the surrounding wilderness. The train station, a mere wooden platform with a rusted stove and a cramped waiting room, stood alone against the biting November wind. Snow didn't fall. It was hurled sideways, swirling across the platform in mesmerizing spirals, dancing before vanishing into the darkness, like lost spirits seeking shelter. Eliza Thornton pulled her thin wool coat tighter around her, but the gesture was more instinct than hope. The cold had seeped through every layer of fabric, burrowing into her bones like an uninvited intruder, claiming every corner without cost. Her trunk stood beside her, its leather-edged corners worn and frayed, much like the dreams that had carried her from Boston to this remote land, where American pioneers sought new opportunities in the harsh West. The station master, a wiry old man named Amos with a face as wrinkled as a dried apple and a disposition twice as sour, glanced at her again through the frost-covered window. His eyes held pity, the kind that made Eliza clench her teeth. He had offered her a place to stay until morning, but pride, the most precious jewel she still possessed, made her refuse. She wasn't ready to accept charity, not now, when self-respect was the only flame keeping her warm in Montana's piercing cold. The letter in her coat pocket rustled as she shifted her weight, trying to revive her numb feet. She didn't need to reread it. Every word was etched into her mind like carvings on wood. Asterisk, Miss Thornton, having learned of your health condition from mutual acquaintances who saw you board the train in Boston, I am compelled to retract my offer of marriage. My ranch requires a robust wife, not a frail woman unable to endure a Montana winter. I have paid for your return ticket to Boston, which you may collect at the station office. Respectfully, Caleb Morgan, respectfully. The word was a knife, sharp and cold. As if rejection could don the guise of courtesy. As if a man who had promised to meet her, who had exchanged letters for 9 months, who had written that he valued her intellect and spirit, could respectfully abandon her at the edge of the wilderness because she wasn't as healthy as he expected. In America at that time, a single woman like Eliza was often judged by her ability to work and bear children, and her illness seemed to have stripped her of that value in Caleb Morgan's eyes. A cough erupted, dry and painful, forcing Eliza to press her handkerchief to her mouth, trying to suppress it quickly. When she pulled it away, she was relieved to see no blood, only the familiar mucus that had haunted her since childhood. Weak lungs, her mother had called it, though Boston doctors gave it fancier names: chronic bronchitis, pulmonary debility. None of them could cure her, and the expensive tonics only eased symptoms for a few hours before the cough returned, like an uninvited guest. The last eastbound train had left 2 hours ago, carrying the faint glow of its lanterns. Eliza watched it fade, part of her longing to board it, to return to Boston, where at least she knew the cobblestone streets and familiar boarding houses. But the stronger part, forged through years of caring for an alcoholic father and an exhausted mother, refused to retreat. She had spent her last savings to come west. Her needlework in Boston, meticulously embroidering floral patterns on silk handkerchiefs for fine ladies, was gone. Her rented room had new tenants. Boston was now just painful memories. A father dead in a drunken stupor, a mother worked to death to feed her and her siblings, and siblings who didn't survive childhood due to illness and poverty. Amos stepped out from the station, holding a swaying lantern, its pale yellow light cutting through the snow. Last stagecoach to Pine Hollow leaves in 10 minutes. No more till Wednesday if the weather permits. I haven't decided, Eliza replied, her voice steadier than her heart felt. She didn't want to admit she had no other options. There's nothing to decide, Amos said, not unkindly, just with the bluntness of a man who'd lived long enough in the West to know hesitation served no purpose. You can't stay here, and Baxter's Inn is full. Pine Hollow has Widow Sullivan's place, clean beds, fair price. Another cough shook her, and Amos stepped back, his pitying look turning to wariness. Eliza was used to that shift. The moment kindness became fear, as if her illness could spread through the air. "I'll take the stagecoach," she said softly, her voice small but resolute. The stagecoach was little more than a crude wagon, with hard wooden benches and thin curtains that did nothing to block the cold. Eliza sat alone, her trunk strapped to the roof, her future as murky as the road ahead, where snow-dusted pines stood silent like sentinels in the night. The driver, a taciturn man with jagged teeth and a scruffy beard, only grunted as she boarded. His indifference was a form of mercy, free of judgment or curiosity, a rare thing in the West, where gossip spread faster than a prairie storm. The stagecoach's swaying motion lulled Eliza into a half-dream state. In her haze, she recalled the letters that had brought her here. Caleb Morgan wrote of his 200 acres, the log house he'd built with pine planks fragrant with sap, and his need for a practical wife to tame the wilderness with him. He didn't demand beauty or youth. Eliza, at 33, had little of either to offer. But he wrote, "I don't need a frivolous girl. A woman with education, who can keep accounts and understands life here is labor and patience. Such a woman is worth more than silver." Those words, inked in black on white paper, had kindled hope in her, like a small fire in winter. Eliza had believed him. She sewed a new dress, simple blue but elegant, and packed her treasured books, Hawthorne, Emerson, and a volume of Longfellow's poetry she couldn't bear to leave behind. She sold everything else, from her mother's silver mirror to the embroidery needles that had been her pride. She endured the cramped train car, the suspicious glances from passengers when she coughed, the discomfort of sleeping upright for days, all for this bitter failure. The stagecoach jolted, snapping Eliza back to reality. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded beast, snow pounding the windows with growing fury. "Big storm coming," the driver shouted, his voice nearly drowned by the wind. "Might have to stop at Baxter's." Eliza's heart sank. Another delay, another strange place. But the alternative, pressing through the storm, was worse. She nodded, though the driver didn't see, and braced herself as the coach sped up, its wheels screeching on the rough road, racing the worsening weather. Baxter's station was just a small trading post with a few attached bedrooms, nestled among pines and snow. The owner, a burly man with a beard reaching his chest, was annoyed by their arrival, but grudgingly led Eliza to a small room off the main store. It smelled of tobacco and animal hides, but it was warm, and after the biting cold, warmth felt like a luxury, like a hot coffee on a Boston winter morning. "Coach won't move till morning, if we're lucky," the driver announced before disappearing into another room, where laughter and clinking glasses suggested a few men were passing the storm with whiskey and poker, a common pastime at Western way stations. Alone, Eliza sat on the narrow bed, the mattress creaking under her weight. Finally, she allowed herself to cry. The tears fell silently. Years of practice kept her pain soundless. She wept for the hope that had brought her west, for the rejection that had greeted her, for the uncertain future ahead, and for the dreams once bright now reduced to ashes. The door swung open without warning, making Eliza hastily wipe her eyes. A tall man stood in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the lantern light from the main room, creating an almost surreal image amid the storm. For a moment both were silent, as if time had paused. "Sorry to disturb you," he said at last, his voice low and warm, matching his broad frame. "Baxter said you might need these." He held out a bundle of blankets, neatly folded. "Thank you," Eliza replied, reaching for them. The man stepped inside, and in the dim glow of the oil lamp on the table, she saw his face clearly. He wasn't young, about 40, with a square jaw partly hidden by a neatly trimmed beard flecked with gray. His deep, thoughtful eyes studied her, not with pity or judgment, but with calm, meaningful observation. "Stagecoach stuck in the storm?" he asked, still near the door, as if reluctant to invade her space. "Yes, we were headed to Pine Hollow. Bad timing." This storm came faster than anyone predicted. A strong gust rattled the window, making Eliza flinch, triggering another cough. She turned away, pressing her handkerchief to her mouth, trying to stifle it. The man didn't step back like most did. Instead, he waited for the cough to pass, then asked, "How long have you had that cough?" The directness of the question startled her, but there was something comforting in its sincerity. "Most of my life," she answered honestly. "Worse in winter," he nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "I'm Samuel Bennett," he said. "Most folks around here call me Doc." "Eliza Thornton," she replied, then added with a bitterness she couldn't suppress, "Just call me Eliza." "Well, Eliza," he said, a slight smile warming his face like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, "I have some remedies that might ease that cough if you're willing." She had tried countless treatments, expensive tonics from Boston apothecaries, homemade herbal syrups, pungent poultices. None worked for long. But Doc Bennett's steady gaze and unassuming confidence made her nod. "I'll fetch them," he said, and left before she could respond. Alone, Eliza spread the blankets on the bed. They were surprisingly soft, made of wool lined with fur, likely rabbit or mink, a common craft at Western way stations. Their simple kindness, and that of the man who brought them, tightened her throat. Doc Bennett returned, carrying a small, intricately carved wooden box, like a family heirloom. He set it on the table and opened it, revealing glass vials, tin containers, and packets of dried herbs arranged neatly, a miniature apothecary. "I need to heat this," he explained, pointing to a small pot from the box. "May I use your stove?" The tiny iron stove in the corner barely deserved the name, providing just enough warmth for the cramped space, but Eliza nodded. As he worked, she observed him closely. His clothes were of good quality but worn, not those of a wealthy man, but of someone who valued durability over quantity, a trait common among Western settlers, where everything had to withstand the harsh climate. His large hands moved with surprising delicacy as he measured and mixed, like an artist preparing a palette. Preparing and telling this story takes a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, please subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "You're not from around here," he remarked, not looking up from his task, his tone casual like a fireside chat. "No, I'm from Boston. That's a long way to travel alone." The unspoken question hung between them. Eliza considered deflecting, but she was too weary to pretend. "I came to marry a man I'd never met," she said plainly, her voice steady but not hiding the pain. "He changed his mind when he heard I was frail." Doc Bennett's hands paused for a moment, then resumed. "Caleb Morgan," he said, not a question but a statement. Eliza felt her cheeks flush with shame. "News travels fast here. Small towns don't have much to trade but information," he replied, his tone dry but not judgmental. "Morgan's mail-order bride wasn't a secret, nor was his decision to back out when he heard you were ill from mutual acquaintances. People I never met, who took it upon themselves to report I was coughing on the train," Eliza said bitterly, quoting Morgan's letter with unconcealed resentment. Doc Bennett made a displeased sound, as if Morgan's shallowness irritated him. "Morgan's always cared more for land than people. You might be better off not ending up with him." "Easy to say," Eliza shot back, her voice sharper than intended. "You're not the one stranded with no prospects, no money, in a strange place where no one knows you." Instead of bristling, he nodded, accepting her rebuke like someone used to criticism. "Fair enough. Still, Pine Hollow might offer more opportunities than you think." The mixture on the stove began to steam, releasing a fragrant aroma of herbs blended with something almost sweet, like wild honey. Doc Bennett carefully poured it into a chipped porcelain cup, adding a spoonful of honey from a small jar in his box. "Drink it while it's hot," he instructed, handing her the cup. "All of it?" Eliza took the cup cautiously, the warmth from the porcelain soothing her cold hands. The amber liquid smelled of pine, mint, and something she couldn't place, perhaps a native root. "What is this?" she asked, not out of suspicion but curiosity. "A blend of white pine bark, wild cherry, thyme, and a few things that grow on these mountains," he explained, his voice carrying a quiet pride, like a farmer discussing his harvest. "Safe, I assure you." She took a tentative sip, bracing for the bitter taste common in medicines. But the flavor was strange, not unpleasant, slightly bitter at first, then sweetening with the honey like a symphony of nature. Almost immediately, she felt warmth spread through her chest, easing the familiar tightness. "I've tried pine bark syrup before," she said after another sip. "This is different. Proportions matter," Doc Bennett replied, closing his box with a soft click. "So does the freshness of the ingredients. Most commercial preparations lose potency traveling from cities like Chicago or New York." Eliza kept drinking, surprised to feel the tightness in her chest ease with each sip. Outside, the storm still raged, but in this small room, with the stove's warmth and the unexpected kindness of a stranger, she felt, if not safe, at least less adrift, like a ship finding a temporary harbor amid the waves. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. Doc Bennett looked up, genuinely surprised by the question. "Why wouldn't I? Most people steer clear of the sick, especially strangers," she said, recalling the wary glances on the train, the whispers behind her back in Boston. He closed his box, his movements deliberate, as if weighing his response. "I'm not most people, Miss Thornton. An illness doesn't make anyone less deserving of basic kindness." There was something unspoken in his words, a personal story coloring them with deep sincerity. Eliza didn't press. In the West, she'd learned that everyone carried scars, visible or not, and they weren't always ready to share. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice softer than she'd intended. "You should rest," he advised, moving toward the door. "I'll leave another dose for the morning. Take it before you board the stagecoach. Will I see you again?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, surprising her as much as it seemed to surprise him. Doc Bennett paused, hand on the latch, turning back to look at her. "I'm headed to Pine Hollow too, once the storm clears. We might share the same road." After he left, Eliza finished the remedy and lay down, wrapped in the borrowed blankets. For the first time in months, her breathing came easier, without the usual wheeze accompanying each inhale. Outside, the wind still howled, but it seemed distant now, less threatening, like a beast tired from its rage. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She still had no plan, no destination beyond Pine Hollow, no prospects, and only a few coins in her purse. But tonight, in this moment, she allowed herself to hold onto a fragile thread of something she'd nearly forgotten: hope. Dawn at Baxter's Station emerged with reluctant light, as if the sun itself struggled against the lingering storm. The snow had stopped falling, but shoulder-high drifts piled against the trading post's walls, and the world beyond the frosted windows was a transformed landscape, familiar shapes rendered alien under a thick white mantle. The pine trees stood silent, their branches heavy with snow, like sentinels guarding the land since time immemorial. Eliza woke with an unfamiliar sensation. The exhaustion that typically clung to her each morning, like a heavy shadow, had eased, replaced by something akin to energy. Her lungs, though not fully clear, breathed without the familiar ache, as if a long-shut door had been cracked open. She sat up slowly, half expecting the improvement to vanish like morning mist, but it lingered, an unexpected gift amid dark days. On the small bedside table, another mug sat covered with a clean cloth, beside a neatly folded note. Eliza reached for it, the paper crisp under her fingers. "Drink before you leave. Stagecoach departs at 9 if the road's clear." S.B. The handwriting was tidy, precise, like that of someone accustomed to meticulous record-keeping. The mixture in the mug resembled last night's dose, though slightly thicker, with a stronger herbal scent. Eliza drank without hesitation, feeling the familiar warmth spread through her chest, a reminder that she still had the strength to fight. Whatever Doc Bennett had done, it worked better than any remedy she'd tried in Boston, where doctors only prescribed expensive tonics without truly understanding her illness. The trading post's common room buzzed with activity as Eliza emerged, still wearing her blue dress but now brushed free of road dust. A few men in thick leather coats, the kind common among western cattle ranchers, argued over the best route to clear the snow, while others devoured plates of stewed beans and biscuits, the staple fare of way stations. The smell of burnt coffee and tobacco smoke mingled in the air, creating an atmosphere both rugged and cozy. Near the large stone fireplace, Baxter himself stood behind the counter, poring over ledgers with the focus of a surgeon. "Thought you'd sleep past departure," a familiar voice remarked. Doc Bennett sat at a small table by the window, a mug of black coffee and a worn book with a faded leather cover before him. In the daylight, Eliza saw his weathered face more clearly. The crow's feet at his eyes spoke of squinting into the distance, perhaps while riding across vast prairies or reading by lamplight. But there was gentleness, too, especially in how he closed the book carefully, marking the page with a thin leather strip, as if each book were a cherished friend. "Your medicine helped," Eliza said, approaching his table, her voice tinged with surprise. "I haven't slept that well in years." "Good. White pine bark is particularly effective for wet coughs, especially when blended right," he replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Have you eaten?" Eliza hesitated. Her money was limited, just a few silver coins and a small silver ring she kept for emergencies. She needed to be frugal until she found work. Doc Bennett seemed to read her thoughts, a skill she was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. "The stagecoach ticket includes breakfast," he said simply. "Baxter's biscuits are worth claiming your share. They are baked in an old-style clay oven, keeps the buttery flavor." Pride wrestled with practicality, for a moment before hunger tipped the scales. Eliza nodded and sat, feeling the warmth from the nearby fireplace. "You said you're heading to Pine Hollow too?" she asked as Baxter's wife, a plump woman with quick movements and sharp eyes, set a plate of steaming biscuits and a mug of coffee before her. The biscuit's rich, buttery aroma made her stomach rumble. "Yep. I make rounds to the smaller settlements every few months," he replied, sipping his coffee. "Pine Hollow's my main home, but places like Willow Bend, Iron Creek, or Blackwater Gulch need medical care too. Folks out here don't have many trained doctors, so I fill the gap." "A traveling doctor," Eliza mused, breaking open a steaming biscuit. The heat rose, carrying the scent of butter and flour, reminiscent of rare Boston mornings when her mother was still strong enough to bake. "Apothecary," he corrected with a faint smile, the corner of his mouth lifting as if sharing a small secret. "Never finished formal medical training." The Civil War interrupted. He didn't elaborate, but a shadow crossed his face, like a cloud obscuring the sun, enough for Eliza to sense he'd seen things not easily forgotten. "And yet people trust you with their health," she said, not doubting but marveling. "In Boston, doctors flaunted diplomas on their walls, but here, experience and kindness seem to matter more than papers." "Out west, folks make do with what's available," he replied, his voice carrying a practicality free of arrogance. "I had good teachers, local healers, old medical texts, and most importantly, observation. Nature provides medicine if you know where to look. These mountains are full of herbs the native people have used for centuries." There was passion in his voice when he spoke of plants and their properties, a fervor that drew Eliza in despite her usual wariness of strangers. Perhaps it was the afterglow of a restful night, or, simply, the relief of talking to someone who didn't flinch at her cough, but she found herself relaxing into the conversation with this unusual man. He spoke of learning from a Shoshone healer how to use roots to reduce fevers and experimenting with herbs to find the right blends for mountain ailments. "Stagecoach leaves in 20 minutes, the driver called from the door, stamping snow off his buffalo hide boots, the durable kind favored by miners and ranchers. "Road's clear enough to go, but it'll be slow." The announcement yanked her back to reality. Eliza still had no real plan beyond reaching Pine Hollow. She had enough money for about 2 weeks at a modest boarding house, then. "You're worrying," Doc Bennett observed softly, his voice low enough to be private. Eliza squared her shoulders, trying to mask her unease. "I'm being realistic. Pine Hollow's unknown territory. I don't know anyone, have no job and," she trailed off, unwilling to admit she had little left but pride and a few books. "Pine Hollow's a decent town," he said, his voice carrying a reassuring certainty. "Smaller than what you're used to in Boston, I'd wager, but growing. The silver mine brings steady work, and where there's work, there's need for services, from seamstresses to teachers, cooks to bookkeepers." "I doubt miners need embroidered silk handkerchiefs," Eliza said, referencing the trade she'd left behind in Boston with a touch of bitterness. Her needlework had once been sought after by Beacon Hill's ladies, but here, it seemed as useless as a silk gown in a blizzard. "Maybe not silk handkerchiefs," he agreed, but his eyes held a playful glint. "But they tear through work clothes constantly, leather jackets, jeans, flannel shirts. And the mine owners' families and merchants will value fine embroidery for special occasions, like weddings or Thanksgiving. But you have other skills, don't you?" Surprised, Eliza asked, "Why would you think that?" "Your voice, for one," he replied, his tone calm but perceptive. "The way you speak, the words you choose, not those of someone with a limited education. And the books in your trunk, I saw the spines when you opened it last night." Hawthorne, Emerson, Longfellow. Not everyone hauls those across half the country. Eliza felt exposed, as if he'd peered straight into her past, into the long evenings by the fire with her father, back when he was still sober and passionate about teaching her literature. "My father was a scholar before he fell apart," she admitted, her voice softening. "He insisted on teaching me when we couldn't afford proper schooling. I learned reading, writing, arithmetic, and literature, though my mother thought it extravagant for a girl." Doc Bennett nodded, without judgment, as if her story were the most natural thing. Education's never wasted, especially in frontier towns. Pine Hollow has a school, but the teacher left last month. Her husband struck silver, and they moved to Cheyenne for a new start. His implication was clear, and Eliza felt a spark of hope flare, though she tried to tamp it down. She taught briefly in Boston, tutoring middle-class families' children, but her cough had alarmed parents, who feared she'd infect their students. "Teaching requires good health," she said, unable to hide her bitterness. "I learned that in Boston." "It requires knowledge and patience," Doc Bennett countered, his voice firm. "Both of which you have, from what I've seen. The rest," he gestured to the empty mug before her, "we can manage." "We," Eliza echoed, slightly startled by how naturally he included her in his plans. "I've studied respiratory treatments for years," he explained, his voice carrying a quiet confidence. "Your case is interesting, not because it's severe, but because it may respond well to the treatments I've been refining." "You mean pitiful," she said, half joking, half hiding her unease. "I mean medically intriguing," he corrected, his tone resolute but not harsh. "And treatable, or at least manageable, with the right approach. I'm not promising miracles, but I believe we can significantly improve your condition." Before Eliza could respond, the driver bellowed another warning from the door, his voice cutting through the common room's din. "10 minutes till we roll." "Get ready." Around them, passengers gathered belongings, stood, and pulled on coats and hats. "This conversation isn't over," Doc Bennett said, rising and tucking his book under his arm. "But we should probably continue it on the road." The journey to Pine Hollow, the stagecoach journey to Pine Hollow, was even more grueling than the previous days. The road, partially blocked by snow, caused the coach to sway and lurch alarmingly as it navigated narrow paths cleared by earlier travelers, likely ranchers or miners chasing fortune. Inside, passengers were packed closer than usual, but the emergency temporarily suspended social niceties. Eliza sat beside Doc Bennett, their shoulders brushing with each jolt, an unavoidable closeness that wasn't unpleasant. Across from them, a young mother named Sarah Larson clutched her sleeping child, a girl wrapped in a wool blanket with a pink ribbon. Beside her, an old miner snored loudly, head tilted against the window, his cowboy hat pulled over his eyes. "How far is Pine Hollow?" Eliza asked quietly after a particularly rough jolt nearly threw her into Doc Bennett's lap. She quickly righted herself, cheeks warming at her clumsiness. "About 4 hours in good conditions," he replied, his voice steady as if such trips were routine. "Today, probably closer to 6. Snowy roads slow everything, and this driver doesn't take risks." The news wasn't encouraging, but Eliza had endured worse: sleepless nights on trains, coughing fits that kept her awake, long days working with hands aching from embroidery needles. She shifted, trying to find a position that didn't strain her back or press her too closely against her neighbor. "Here," Doc Bennett said, reaching into his coat pocket, a thick Western-style wool coat with a fur collar. He produced a small tin, opening it to reveal amber-colored hard candies. "Honey and wild cherry lozenges. They'll soothe your throat for the ride." Eliza took one, murmuring thanks. The lozenge was small but carefully made, its surface gleaming as if polished. She sucked on it, the initial slight bitterness giving way to a sweet, herbal warmth, like a miniature dose of medicine. "You carry a whole pharmacy in your coat," she remarked, her tone lightly teasing. His smile was brief but genuine, brightening his stern face. "Habit. I never know when someone might need something. Out west, you learn to be ready for anything, from a sudden storm to a fever flare-up." "And what do people need more than they realize?" she asked, curious about how he seemed to anticipate others' needs. He glanced at Mrs. Larson across from them, his gaze sharp but not judgmental. "Like Mrs. Larson there. She doesn't yet know her child's running a fever." Eliza followed his gaze. The child did look flushed, now that it was pointed out, and her breathing was faster than normal, even in sleep. "How do you know?" she asked, keeping her voice low to avoid disturbing the young mother. "The skin around the temples has a particular sheen, and she's breathing faster than usual for sleep," he explained, his tone that of a teacher rather than a braggart. "I've seen hundreds of cases like this. A mild fever, likely from the cold or travel fatigue, but best to address it before it worsens." As if on cue, the child stirred, letting out a thin, fretful cry. Mrs. Larson, visibly exhausted, tried to soothe her, but the cries grew louder, echoing in the cramped coach. Without hesitation, Doc Bennett leaned forward, his movements gentle but purposeful. "Pardon me, ma'am. I noticed the little one seems uncomfortable. I'm Doc Bennett from Pine Hollow, an apothecary." The woman looked up, relief flooding her tired face, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "She's been fussy since last night," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought it might be the travel, but I'm not sure." "May I check?" Doc Bennett asked, his hand hovering near but not touching the child, showing respect for the mother's space. When Mrs. Larson nodded, he gently placed the back of his hand on the child's forehead, his touch precise yet tender. "Mild fever," he concluded. "Not dangerous yet, but we should address it before we reach Pine Hollow, where mine dust could make things worse." He reached into another pocket, producing a small glass vial of pale brown liquid. "2 drops in a spoonful of water every 4 hours, he instructed, handing the vial to Mrs. Larson. "It'll ease the discomfort and bring the fever down. I'll check again when we reach town." "I don't have much money," Mrs. Larson began, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment, a common reaction among new settlers in the West, where cash was often scarce. Doc Bennett waved it off with a gentle gesture. "First visit's always free," he said, his voice carrying an undeniable sincerity. "Call it a welcome to Pine Hollow." The quiet kindness of the act struck Eliza deeply. In Boston, doctors treated the poor with barely concealed disdain, if they treated them at all. Here in the wilderness, a man who carried remedies in his coat, ready to help without expecting payment, was a rarity. It echoed the community spirit she'd heard in stories of the West, where strangers became family through shared hardship. "Very generous," she said softly after Mrs. Larson administered the medicine, and the child settled, nestled in her mother's arms. Doc Bennett shrugged, seeming uncomfortable with the praise. "Kindness costs nothing," he said, his voice carrying a simplicity that made the words more profound. "And healthy children make a healthy community. If we don't look out for each other, this land will swallow us all." "Is that why you became a healer?" "For the community," she asked, curious about his motives, about the man who seemed both physician and philosopher. He was silent so long that Eliza thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, meant for her alone, like a secret shared between them. "I was a soldier first," he said, his gaze distant, as if seeing memories long past. "Saw too much death, caused some of it in the Civil War. Afterward, I needed to balance the scales, do good to make up for what I'd done or couldn't stop. The simple honesty of his words hung between them, more intimate than any touch. Eliza wanted to offer comfort, though she sensed he wasn't one to accept it easily. "From what I've seen," she said, her voice soft but certain, "your scales tip heavily toward life." His eyes, when they met hers, held a warmth that had nothing to do with the cramped coach's confines. It was the look of a man who'd found purpose, however painful the path. "Thank you, Eliza," he said, and for the first time he used her first name alone, a small but notable intimacy. The journey continues. The stagecoach ride unfolded in friendly conversation, interspersed with comfortable silences. Doc Bennett asked about her life in Boston, not prying but genuinely curious, as if every detail of her story was worth hearing. Eliza found herself sharing more than she intended: the decline of her father into alcoholism after her mother's death, selling possessions to pay debts, teaching herself embroidery to survive, and the long evenings reading to escape reality. In return, he spoke of Pine Hollow, a town that sprang up almost overnight when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains 7 years ago. Unlike many mining towns, which were mere transient camps, Pine Hollow had established itself as something more enduring, with families settling alongside the first wave of miners. "It's still rough around the edges," he admitted, his voice tinged with pride for his town. "But a real community is taking shape. There's a church where Reverend Harper preaches every Sunday, a school, though it's short a teacher right now, and even a small library, mostly from my own collection. Folks here are hungry for knowledge, even if they don't always admit it." "You gave away your books?" Eliza asked, surprised by his generosity. "Lent," he corrected, flashing a rare smile that lit up his face. "Though I suspect some won't ever come back. Books, like medicine, do the most good when shared. A book sitting idle on a shelf doesn't help anyone." The stagecoach hit a deep rut, jolting the passengers. The baby woke with a wail, and Mrs. Larson looked on the verge of tears from exhaustion. Without discussion, Eliza reached out, a reflex from her days caring for younger siblings. "May I hold her for a bit to give you a rest?" she asked, her voice gentle. The relief on the young mother's face was answer enough. She carefully handed the bundled baby to Eliza, whispering thanks before leaning back and closing her eyes, as if even a few minutes of quiet were a precious gift. The baby, a girl named Emily, according to Mrs. Larson, studied Eliza with solemn eyes. She was beautiful, as all babies are, with chubby cheeks and a serious expression, as if assessing whether Eliza was worthy of holding her. "Hello, little one," Eliza whispered, gently rocking as the baby fussed. "You've had quite an adventure already, haven't you?" To her surprise, Emily nestled closer, tiny fingers grasping a loose strand of Eliza's hair, as if seeking comfort. The trust, though unearned, tightened Eliza's throat. She thought of her siblings, children who didn't survive childhood due to illness and poverty, and old pain stirred, though tempered by the warmth of the baby in her arms. Doc Bennett watched the exchange with an unreadable expression, but there was a softness in his eyes. "You're good with children," he observed, his voice low but clear. "I had younger siblings," Eliza replied, not adding that none of them were still alive. Some sorrows were too heavy for casual conversation, even with someone as understanding as Doc Bennett seemed to be. Emily eventually drifted off on her shoulder, her warm weight both strange and familiar, like a memory from another life. Eliza found herself relaxing, lulled by the stagecoach's swaying rhythm and the steady presence of the man beside her, who somehow made her feel safe despite knowing him for less than a day. "We're pulling into Pine Hollow," the driver called from above, his voice cutting through Eliza's near-dreamlike state. She sat up, suddenly alert and anxious again. This was where she'd have to build a new life from the ruins of her old plans, a place that would either offer refuge or reject her, as Caleb Morgan had. "You'll be all right," Doc Bennett said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. His words weren't an empty promise, but a statement rooted in belief in her strength. Mrs. Larson stirred as the coach slowed, gratefully taking back the sleeping Emily. "Thank you," she said to Eliza, her voice trembling with gratitude. "My husband's waiting for us. He came ahead to find work in the mines. I don't know how I'd have managed alone with a sick baby." "That's what community does," Doc Bennett said, echoing his earlier sentiment. "Helps each other through the rough patches. Pine Hollow's not perfect, but we look out for one another." The stagecoach came to a stop with a final lurch and the creak of springs. Outside, Eliza heard voices, the clop of hooves, and a church bell ringing nearby, the sounds of a town alive despite the recent storm. "Ready?" Doc Bennett asked, offering his hand as the coach door opened, a gesture both courteous and sincere. Eliza hesitated only a moment before taking it. His hand was steady, warm even through her wool gloves, like an anchor in the storm of her life. "As ready as I can be," she replied, and stepped into Pine Hollow. Pine Hollow. A new beginning. Pine Hollow's main street stretched before her, lined with buildings, some hastily built from rough pine, others surprisingly sturdy, with real glass windows and shingled roofs. A hotel, the Silver Star, stood proudly at one end, its red-painted sign gleaming in the weak afternoon sun. Near the stagecoach stop, a row of shops displayed goods behind snow-dusted porches, sacks of flour, bolts of flannel, mining tools, and cowboy hats hanging on hooks. People hurried along wooden walkways, bundled against the cold, miners in thick leather coats, women in practical wool dresses, children darting among adults with the boundless energy of youth, playing tag or tossing snowballs. This wasn't Boston, with its cobblestone streets, ornate carriages, and red brick mansions on Beacon Hill. Pine Hollow existed on its own terms, raw, vibrant, and unapologetically a frontier town. It embodied the spirit of the American West, where settlers from all corners, poor Midwestern farmers to Europeans fleeing famine, gathered to build new lives, despite the harsh land and brutal winters. Doc Bennett, a man called from across the street, waving enthusiastically over his cowboy hat. "You're back. Betsy's cow is about to calve, and I need you to take a look, Mr. Callahan," Doc Bennett replied with a nod, his voice carrying natural warmth. "I'll stop by this afternoon. Give Betsy extra hay and don't let her get stressed." Similar greetings came from all directions as townsfolk noticed his return. A shopkeeper stepped onto his porch, wiping his hands on an apron and calling to ask about medicine for his wife. A group of women paused mid-errand, smiling and waving. Even the sheriff, a tall man with a silver star on his chest, raised a hand from his office doorway. Clearly, Doc Bennett wasn't just tolerated but essential to the community, respected, perhaps even beloved, like a father or elder brother in a large family. Standing beside him, still holding his arm, Eliza felt both invisible and conspicuous. Curious glances their way made her acutely aware of her travel-worn appearance, her crumpled blue dress, hastily pinned hair, and pale face after days on the road. She was a stranger in a small town, where everyone knew each other by name and story. "Everyone knows you," she whispered, her voice tinged with surprise. "In a small community like this, everyone knows everyone," he replied, a hint of humor in his tone. "That means you won't stay a stranger for long. Pine Hollow has a way of embracing newcomers, as long as they're willing to work and fit in." Whether that was a promise or a warning, Eliza wasn't sure. But as he guided her down the main street, pointing out landmarks, Mr. Gardiner's General Store, the Caldwell Brothers blacksmith shop, and the white wooden church with its modest steeple, she felt a spark of new hope, like a seed planted in fresh soil. Widow Sullivan's boarding house sat 3 streets off the main road, a sturdy 2-story pine building with bright red shutters, and a front porch swept clear of snow. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys, promising warmth inside, and white lace curtains hung at the windows, a touch of elegance in a frontier town that cared little for ostentation. A small sign out front, carved with Sullivan's boarding house, swayed gently in the breeze, a welcoming marker, but also a reminder that this was a place for respectable women, as Westerners often drew clear lines between proper ladies and those working in saloons. The best lodging in town for a respectable woman, Doc Bennett explained as he helped the driver unload Eliza's trunk, a courteous but unshowy act. Mrs. Sullivan runs a tight ship, but a fair one, and her cooking is the best in the county. Her sourdough apple pie won a ribbon at last year's fair. As if summoned by her name, the front door swung open, revealing a woman who defied Eliza's expectations. Instead of a stern matron, Widow Sullivan was a striking woman of about 50, with auburn hair barely touched by gray, neatly pinned under a headscarf. Deep laugh lines around her bright eyes spoke of a life full of both joy and challenges. She wore a practical navy wool dress, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a white apron dusted with flour, signs of someone always busy but never losing her grace. "Samuel Bennett," she called, wiping her hands on her apron with a radiant smile. "About time you showed up. Half the town's been asking when you'd be back, especially Mr. Peterson, who insists you check his aching leg." "Margaret," he greeted with genuine warmth, as if they were old friends. "I see you're busy with that famous sourdough pie. Don't tell me you're saving it all for the church ladies." Mrs. Sullivan laughed, a rich, resonant sound. "You always know how to make me smile, Samuel. And don't worry, I'll save you a slice, if you promise not to tell the Caldwell boys." Her gaze shifted to Eliza, sharp but not unkind, like someone accustomed to sizing up boarders in an instant. "And who's this?" "Miss Eliza Thornton, newly arrived from Boston," Doc Bennett introduced, his voice carrying a respect that caught Eliza off guard. "She needs a place to stay, and I figured there's no better place than yours." Widow Sullivan, Margaret, assessed Eliza with the eye of someone who'd seen many travelers come and go, from miners chasing fortunes to widows seeking fresh starts. "Boston's a long way," she remarked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "What brings you to this little corner of Montana?" The question, though expected, made Eliza's cheeks burn with shame. How could she explain that she'd crossed the country to marry a stranger, only to be rejected without a meeting? Before she could find words, Doc Bennett stepped in smoothly. "Miss Thornton's considering teaching positions," he said, his tone so natural it seemed an obvious truth. Pine Hollow could benefit from her experience, especially since Mrs. Whittaker left. It wasn't exactly a lie, though it skirted the more humiliating truth, and Eliza shot him a grateful glance. She took a breath, steadying herself, and spoke directly to Mrs. Sullivan. "I hope I'm not imposing, ma'am. I'd like a room for at least 2 weeks while I explore opportunities in Pine Hollow." Margaret's expression softened, and a warm smile spread across her face. "2 weeks is easy to manage," she said, her voice carrying genuine welcome. "I've got a room on the 2nd floor, small but with its own fireplace and a view of the Bitterroot Mountains. $5 a week, including breakfast and supper. If you want lunch, I can arrange it for a small extra fee." The price was fair, perhaps even generous for a frontier town where everything from food to lodging was costly due to transport expenses. Eliza nodded, relief washing over her like a cool breeze. "That sounds perfect." "Thank you. Well then," Margaret said briskly, shifting to business mode, "let's get you settled. Samuel staying for supper. The Caldwell boys have been asking for you daily, about a promised chess lesson." Young Tommy even drew a chessboard on paper to practice. Doc Bennett smiled, an expression that transformed his stern face as if it shed years. "I wouldn't miss a chance to beat Tommy again," he said, his voice lightly teasing. "But I should check on a few patients first. Miss Thornton, I'll stop by tomorrow to discuss the treatment we talked about." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, striding down the main street with purposeful steps, his wool coat flapping in the wind. Eliza watched him go, feeling an odd emptiness despite knowing him for less than a day. There was something about him, a blend of quiet strength and genuine kindness, that made her feel she'd found an ally if only temporarily. "Interesting man, that Doc Bennett," Margaret remarked, missing nothing, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Came here 6 years ago with nothing but a medical bag and a face like he carried the world on his shoulders. Now half the county relies on his remedies, and the other half just wants to invite him to supper to hear his stories." Eliza didn't know how to respond to the comment or the curious glance that followed, so she nodded and followed Margaret into the boarding house. Inside was as well kept as its exterior, a cleanliness and order rare in frontier towns. A central hallway led past a formal parlor, with floral upholstered armchairs and an old piano, to a cozy dining room with a long wooden table. At the back, a smaller sitting room exuded the scent of baked apples, cinnamon, and beeswax, mingled with lavender from sachets hung on the walls, a refined touch reminiscent of New England homes. "Supper's at 6 sharp," Margaret explained as she led Eliza up a polished wooden staircase, each step creaking softly underfoot. "Breakfast from 7 to 8. I don't serve lunch since folks are usually out, but there's always bread, jam, and sometimes bacon in the kitchen if you need it. Just let me know so I can plan." The room, when they reached it, was indeed small but immaculately clean, as if prepared for a special guest. A narrow bed with a brass frame stood against one wall, draped in a blue and white quilt with plump pillows. A washstand with a porcelain pitcher and basin sat in another corner, beside a small mirror hung on the wall. An upholstered armchair rested near the window, now laced with delicate frost patterns, overlooking the distant Bitterroot Mountains, their peaks still snow-capped. As promised, a small iron fireplace in the opposite corner was already lit, radiating comforting warmth that melted the lingering chill in Eliza's bones. Beside it was a simple writing desk and chair, with an oil lamp ready for evening use. "It's lovely," Eliza said sincerely, her voice trembling with emotion. After weeks on the road, sleeping on hard train seats and cold stagecoach floors, this tidy little space felt like a luxury, like a real home, if only temporary. "It'll do," Margaret replied, but her tone showed she was pleased with the praise. The bathrooms at the end of the hall, shared with Mrs. Harper, the seamstress, and Miss Baxter, who works at the general store. "Both are decent, discreet women, so you won't have to worry about privacy." Eliza nodded, understanding. In close quarters like these, good neighbors were as vital as the lodging itself. "I'll have hot water sent up for you to wash before supper," Margaret continued, her voice brisk but not rushed. "Any questions, just ask. And Miss Thornton, welcome to Pine Hollow." The journey continued with friendly conversation, interspersed with comfortable silences. Doc Bennett asked about her life in Boston, not prying but genuinely interested, as if every detail of her story was worth hearing. Eliza found herself sharing more than she intended. The descent of her father into alcoholism after her mother's death, the gradual selling of possessions to pay debts, how she taught herself embroidery to survive, and the long evenings reading to escape reality. In return, he spoke of Pine Hollow, a town that sprang up almost overnight when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains 7 years ago. Unlike many mining towns, mere transient camps, Pine Hollow had established itself as something more permanent, with families settling alongside the first wave of prospectors. "It's still rough," he admitted, his voice carrying a hint of pride for his town. "But a real community is taking shape. There's a church where Reverend Harper preaches every Sunday, a school, though it's without a teacher now, and even a small library, though most of the books are from my collection. Folks here are hungry for knowledge, even if they don't always admit it." "You gave away your books?" Eliza asked, surprised by his generosity. "Lent," he corrected, flashing a rare smile that lit up his face. "Though I suspect some won't ever return. Books, like medicine, are most useful when shared. A book sitting idle on a shelf doesn't help anyone." The stagecoach hit a deep rut, jolting the passengers. The child woke with a cry, and Mrs. Larson looked on the verge of tears herself from exhaustion. Without discussion, Eliza reached out, a reflex from days caring for younger siblings. "May I hold her for a bit so you can rest?" she asked, her voice gentle. The relief on the young mother's face was answer enough. She carefully passed the bundled child to Eliza, whispering thanks before leaning back and closing her eyes, as if even a few minutes of quiet were a precious gift. The child, a girl named Emily, as Mrs. Larson mentioned, regarded Eliza with solemn eyes. She was beautiful, as all children are, with chubby cheeks and a serious expression, as if assessing whether Eliza was worthy of holding her. "Hello, little one," Eliza whispered, gently rocking as the child fussed. "You've had quite an adventure already, haven't you?" To her surprise, Emily nestled against her, tiny fingers grasping a loose strand of her hair, seeking comfort. The trust, though unearned, tightened Eliza's throat. She thought of her siblings, children who didn't survive childhood due to illness and poverty, and old pain stirred, tempered by the warmth of the child in her arms. Doc Bennett watched the exchange with an unreadable expression, but there was softness in his eyes. "You're good with children," he remarked, his voice low but clear. "I had younger siblings," Eliza replied, not adding that none survived. Some sorrows were too heavy for casual conversation, even with someone as understanding as Doc Bennett seemed to be. Emily eventually dozed off on her shoulder, her warm weight both foreign and familiar, like a memory from another life. Eliza found herself relaxing, lulled by the stagecoach's swaying rhythm and the steady presence of the man beside her, who somehow made her feel safe despite knowing him less than a day. "We're entering Pine Hollow," the driver called from above, his voice cutting through Eliza's near dreamlike state. She sat up, suddenly alert and anxious again. This was where she'd have to build a new life from the wreckage of old plans, a place that would either offer refuge or reject her, as Caleb Morgan had. "You'll be fine," Doc Bennett said softly, as if reading her thoughts. His words weren't an empty promise, but a statement rooted in belief in her resilience. Mrs. Larson stirred as the coach slowed, gratefully taking back the sleeping Emily. "Thank you," she said to Eliza, her voice trembling with gratitude. "My husband's waiting for us. He came ahead to find work in the mine. I don't know how I'd have managed alone with a sick child." "That's what communities do," Doc Bennett said, echoing his earlier sentiment. "Help each other through the rough patches. Pine Hollow isn't perfect, but we look out for one another." The stagecoach halted with a final lurch and the creak of springs. Outside, Eliza heard voices, the clop of horses, and a church bell nearby, sounds of a town alive despite the recent storm. "Ready?" Doc Bennett asked, offering his hand as the coach door opened, a gesture both courteous and genuine. Eliza hesitated only a moment before taking it. His hand was steady, warm even through her wool gloves, an anchor amid life's storm. "As ready as I can be," she replied, and stepped into Pine Hollow. Pine Hollow. A new beginning. Pine Hollow's main street stretched before her, lined with buildings, some hastily erected from rough pine, others surprisingly sturdy, with real glass windows and shingled roofs. A hotel, the Silver Star, stood proudly at one end, its red-painted sign gleaming in the weak afternoon sun. Near the stagecoach stop, a row of shops displayed goods under snow-dusted awnings, sacks of flour, bolts of flannel, mining tools, and cowboy hats hung on hooks. People hurried along wooden walkways, bundled against the cold, miners in thick leather coats, women in practical wool dresses, children darting among adults with youth's boundless energy, playing tag or tossing snowballs. This wasn't Boston, with its cobblestone streets, ornate carriages, and red brick mansions on Beacon Hill. Pine Hollow existed on its own terms, raw, vibrant, and unapologetically a frontier town. It embodied the spirit of the American West, where settlers from all corners, Midwestern farmers, Europeans fleeing poverty, gathered to forge new lives, defying harsh land and brutal winters. Doc Bennett, a man called from across the street, waving enthusiastically under a cowboy hat. "You're back. Betsy's cow is about to calve, and I need you to check on her." "Mr. Callahan," Doc Bennett replied with a nod, his voice carrying natural warmth. "I'll stop by this afternoon. Give Betsy extra hay and don't let her get stressed." Similar greetings echoed from all directions as townsfolk noticed his return. A shopkeeper stepped onto his porch, wiping hands on an apron and calling to ask about medicine for his wife. A group of women paused mid-errand, smiling and waving. Even the sheriff, a tall man with a silver star on his chest, raised a hand from his office doorway. Clearly, Doc Bennett wasn't just tolerated but essential to the community, respected, perhaps even beloved, like a father or elder brother in a large family. Standing beside him, still holding his hand, Eliza felt both invisible and conspicuous. Curious glances made her acutely aware of her travel-worn appearance, her crumpled blue dress, hastily pinned hair, and pale face after days on the road. She was a stranger in a small town where everyone knew each other by name and story. "Everyone knows you," she whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "In a small community like this, everyone knows everyone," he replied, a hint of humor in his tone. "Which means you won't be a stranger for long. Pine Hollow has a way of embracing newcomers, as long as they're willing to work and fit in." Whether that was a promise or a warning, Eliza wasn't sure. But as he led her down the main street, pointing out landmarks, Gardner's General Store, the Caldwell Brothers blacksmith shop, the white wooden church with its small bell tower, she felt a new spark of hope, like a seed planted in fresh soil. Widow Sullivan's boarding house stood 3 streets off the main thoroughfare, a sturdy 2-story pine building with bright red shutters and a snow-swept front porch. Smoke curled from twin chimneys, promising warmth within, and white lace curtains hung at the windows, a touch of elegance in a frontier town little concerned with ostentation. A small sign out front, carved with Sullivan's boarding house, swayed gently in the breeze, a welcoming marker, but also a reminder that this was a place for respectable women, as the West often drew clear lines between decent ladies and those working in saloons. "The best lodging in town for a proper lady," Doc Bennett explained as he helped the driver unload Eliza's trunk, a courteous but unshowy act. Mrs. Sullivan runs a tight ship, but a fair one, and her cooking is unmatched in the region. Her sourdough apple pie won a prize at last year's county fair. As if summoned by her name, the front door swung open, revealing a woman who defied Eliza's expectations. Instead of a stern matron, Widow Sullivan was a striking woman of about 50, with auburn hair barely touched by gray, neatly pinned under a headscarf. Deep laugh lines around her bright eyes spoke of a life of both joy and trials. She wore a practical dark green wool dress, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and a white apron dusted with flour, signs of someone always busy yet never losing her grace. "Samuel Bennett," she called, wiping her hands on her apron with a radiant smile. "About time you returned. Half the town's been asking when you'd be back, especially Mrs. Peterson, insisting you check her husband's bad leg." "Margaret," he greeted with genuine warmth, as if they were old friends. "I see you're busy with that famous sourdough pie. Don't tell me you're saving it all for the church ladies' meeting." Mrs. Sullivan laughed, a rich, resonant sound. "You always know how to make me smile, Samuel. And don't worry, I'll save you a slice, if you promise not to tell the Caldwell brothers." Her gaze shifted to Eliza, sharp but not unkind, like someone accustomed to sizing up borders in an instant. "And who's this?" "Miss Eliza Thornton, lately of Boston," Doc Bennett introduced, his voice carrying a respect that surprised Eliza. "She needs lodging, and I figured there's no better place than yours." Widow Sullivan, Margaret, assessed Eliza with the eye of someone who'd seen many travelers come and go, from prospectors chasing riches to widows seeking fresh starts. "Boston's a long way," she remarked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "What brings you to this little corner of Montana?" The question, though expected, made Eliza's cheeks burn with embarrassment. How to explain she'd crossed the country to marry a stranger, only to be rejected without a meeting? Before she could find words, Doc Bennett stepped in smoothly. "Miss Thornton is considering teaching positions," he said, his tone as natural as if it were plain fact. "Pine Hollow could benefit from her experience, especially since Mrs. Whittaker left." It wasn't quite a lie, though it skirted the more humiliating truth, and Eliza shot him a grateful glance. She took a breath, steadying herself, and spoke directly to Mrs. Sullivan. "I hope I'm not imposing, ma'am. I need a place to stay for at least 2 weeks while I explore opportunities in Pine Hollow." Margaret's expression softened, and a genuine smile spread across her face. "2 weeks is easily managed," she said, her voice warm with welcome. "I've got a room on the 2nd floor, small but with its own fireplace and a view of the Bitterroot Mountains. $5 a week, including breakfast and dinner. If you want lunch, I can arrange it for a small extra fee." The price was fair, perhaps even generous by frontier standards, where everything from food to lodging was costly due to transport expenses. Eliza nodded, relief washing over her like a cool breeze. "That sounds perfect. Thank you." "Well then," Margaret said briskly, shifting to business mode, "let's get you settled. Samuel staying for dinner. The Caldwell brothers have been asking after you daily, about a promised chess lesson. The youngest, Tommy, even drew a chessboard on paper to practice." Doc Bennett smiled, an expression that transformed his stern face as if shedding years. "I wouldn't miss a chance to beat Tommy again," he said, his voice lightly teasing. "But I should visit a few patients first. Miss Thornton, I'll stop by tomorrow to discuss the treatment we talked about." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, striding down the main street with purposeful steps, his wool coat flapping in the wind. Eliza watched him go, feeling an odd emptiness despite knowing him less than a day. Something about him, a blend of quiet strength and genuine kindness, made her feel she'd found an ally if only temporarily. "Interesting man, Doc Bennett," Margaret remarked, missing nothing, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Came here 6 years ago with nothing but a medical bag and a serious face, like he carried the world on his shoulders. Now half the county relies on his remedies, and the other half just wants to invite him to dinner to hear his stories." Eliza wasn't sure how to respond to the comment or the curious look accompanying it, so she nodded and followed Margaret into the boarding house. The interior matched its exterior in care, a cleanliness and order rare in frontier towns. A central hallway led past a formal parlor with floral-upholstered armchairs and an old piano to a cozy dining room with a long wooden table. At the back, a smaller sitting room exuded scents of baked apples, cinnamon, and beeswax, mingled with lavender from sachets hung on the walls, a refined touch reminiscent of New England homes. "Dinner's at 6 sharp," Margaret explained as she led Eliza up a polished wooden staircase, each step creaking softly underfoot. "Breakfast from 7 to 8. I don't serve lunch since folks are usually busy, but there's always bread, jam, and sometimes bacon in the kitchen if you need it. Just let me know so I can plan." The room, when they reached it, was indeed small but impeccably clean, as if prepared for a special guest. A narrow bed with a brass frame stood against one wall, draped with a blue and white quilt, its pillows plump and inviting. A washstand with a porcelain pitcher and basin sat in another corner, beside a small mirror hung on the wall. An upholstered armchair by the window, now laced with delicate frost patterns, overlooked the distant Bitterroot Mountains, their peaks still snow-capped. As promised, a small iron fireplace in the opposite corner was lit, radiating comforting warmth that melted the lingering chill in Eliza's bones. Beside it stood a simple writing desk and chair, with an oil lamp ready for evening use. "It's lovely," Eliza said sincerely, her voice catching with emotion. After weeks on the road, sleeping on hard train seats and cold stagecoach floors, this tidy little space felt like luxury, like a real home, if only temporarily. "It'll do," Margaret replied, but her tone suggested she was pleased with the approval. The bathrooms at the end of the hall, shared with Mrs. Harper, the seamstress, and Miss Baxter, who works at the general store. "Both are decent, discreet women, so you needn't worry about privacy." Eliza nodded, understanding. In close quarters like these, compatible neighbors were as vital as the lodging itself. "I'll have hot water sent up so you can wash before dinner," Margaret continued, her voice brisk but not rushed. "Any questions, just ask. And Miss Thornton, welcome to Pine Hollow." The first days in Pine Hollow. The days that followed in Pine Hollow passed in a whirlwind of adaptation and discovery. Eliza settled into Margaret's boarding house, quickly learning the rhythm of the town. Mornings began with breakfast in the dining room, where she conversed with Abigail Baxter and Colonel Rutherford, each offering a unique perspective on Pine Hollow, from Abigail's lively tales of sewing a wedding dress for a miner's bride to the Colonel's historical lectures on Civil War battles. Margaret, as the boarding house matron, was an endless source of town gossip, always ready to share news, from who struck silver to who was feuding over a stray cow. The meeting with the school board took place as scheduled the next afternoon at the white wooden church, a modest building with simple pews and a plain cross above the pulpit. Reverend Harper, a wiry man with a gentle yet authoritative voice, led an opening prayer, asking for guidance for the town and healing for those injured at the Iron Creek mine. Then Colonel Rutherford introduced Eliza to Mr. Townsend, the bank manager, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a cool demeanor, as if appraising her through a financial lens. The interview was brief but thorough. Eliza answered questions about her teaching experience, emphasizing her ability to teach reading, writing, and literature, while admitting she was less familiar with Western geography. She was candid about her health, explaining her chronic lung condition, but noting she was under Doc Bennett's care and it didn't hinder her work. Colonel Rutherford was supportive. Reverend Harper nodded in agreement, but Mr. Townsend remained reserved, questioning whether she could manage a classroom of unruly students. "Children here aren't like those in Boston," Mr. Townsend said, his tone carrying a hint of warning. "They grow up in mines and ranches, more accustomed to labor than books. You'll need to keep them in line." "I believe knowledge is the best way to inspire," Eliza replied, her voice calm but firm. "If I can show them the value of reading and writing, not just for work but to understand the world, I trust they'll engage." Her words seemed to impress the colonel and reverend, and even Mr. Townsend reluctantly agreed. The board unanimously hired her on a 3-month trial contract, starting the following week, at a salary of $15 a month, enough to cover her boarding house costs and save a little. Eliza left the church with a mix of relief and apprehension, knowing she was stepping into a new challenge, but also an opportunity to prove her worth. Teaching began with 28 students, ranging from shy 6-year-olds to stubborn 16-year-olds, many ready to quit school for work in the mines or ranches. The classroom was a small wooden building beside the church, with rough-hewn desks and a large blackboard. Textbooks were scarce, but thanks to Doc Bennett's generosity, there were enough copies of *McGuffey's Reader*, and a few classic literature books for her to use. Eliza quickly realized the colonel was right. The children were unruly, often bickering or distracted, but they were also bright and curious when engaged properly. She started by sharing stories from books, from Huckleberry Finn's adventures to Longfellow's poems, and gradually, even the older students began to listen. Her health, thanks to Doc Bennett's remedies, continued to improve. He visited the boarding house twice weekly, bringing new doses and checking her breathing with an old stethoscope. The remedies, combining white pine bark, wild cherry, and other herbs, not only soothed her cough but helped her breathe more easily, as if her lungs were relearning their function. Their conversations, initially medical, deepened into broader topics, from the meaning of literature to the challenges of Western life. She learned he'd been a soldier in the Civil War, witnessing bloody battles at Shiloh and Antietam, and had chosen healing to atone for what he saw as his sins. But the shadows of the past didn't fade easily. One morning, as Eliza prepared lessons in the classroom, Mr. Townsend appeared at the door, his expensive wool coat flecked with snow, his banker's hat in gloved hands. His demeanor was icy, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Miss Thornton," he said without preamble, "we need to discuss a serious matter." Eliza stood tall, summoning her teacher's authority despite inner unease. "Good morning, Mr. Townsend. I'm preparing tomorrow's lessons. Is something wrong?" "There may be no lessons tomorrow or the day after," he said, his voice calm, not threatening, which made it worse. "The school board meets this afternoon to discuss the situation." "I wasn't aware the board had scheduled a meeting," Eliza replied, striving to keep her voice steady. She'd worked diligently, was liked by students and parents, and had received no complaints. "An emergency session due to circumstances," Mr. Townsend said, stepping into the classroom, his boots leaving snowy tracks on the wooden floor. "Yesterday, my son, Jacob Townsend, was accused of pushing another student, Ethan Larson, down the embankment near the creek during lunch. The boy is seriously injured, and lies in Doc Bennett's clinic. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. She knew of the incident. Several students reported that Jacob, a 16-year-old with an aggressive streak, had taunted Ethan about his father's disability from a prior mine collapse, then pushed him down the rocky embankment. Ethan, 12, suffered a head injury and remained unconscious. She'd written a detailed report for the board, emphasizing that multiple witnesses confirmed Jacob's act was deliberate and that he fled instead of seeking help. "I reported what the students witnessed," she said, her voice resolute. Jacob pushed Ethan, causing him to fall. "It wasn't horseplay." Mr. Townsend's expression tightened, but his voice remained cold. "Children exaggerate, Miss Thornton. They misinterpret roughhousing. Jacob says Larson slipped, and he panicked and ran. That's a boy's reaction, not a crime." "Then why didn't Jacob seek help?" Eliza countered, her voice sharper than intended. "He left Ethan lying there, injured, while other students ran to fetch me. That's not the behavior of an innocent person." Mr. Townsend stepped closer, his posture faintly menacing as he loomed over her desk. "The fact is, Miss Thornton, a child was gravely injured under your supervision. The school board must consider whether the current arrangement is adequate. If you weren't present in the schoolyard when it happened, that's negligence." The accusation struck like a blade, cutting deep into Eliza's self-respect. "The children were in the schoolyard, where they play daily since the school was built," she replied, struggling to keep her voice even as anger rose. "I check on them regularly during lunch, as Mrs. Whittaker did before me. When the incident occurred, I was in the classroom, meeting with Doc Bennett to discuss my medical treatment. Jacob and Ethan were at the far edge of the yard, near the creek, an area students have been repeatedly told to avoid." Mr. Townsend raised an eyebrow, as if her explanation were a flimsy excuse. "You weren't there, Miss Thornton. That's what matters. The board meets at 2 o'clock, and Colonel Rutherford, unfortunately, is ill and unable to attend. Reverend Harper and I will suffice to decide." The injustice was staggering. An emergency meeting, without the colonel to balance the vote and no chance for her to defend herself. Just two men, one the father of the offending boy, deciding her professional fate behind closed doors. "Mr. Townsend," she said carefully, "I understand your concern for your son, but surely you see the conflict of interest in your deciding this matter." His expression hardened, and for a moment Eliza thought he might snap. Instead he smiled, a thin, cold smile. "What I see, Miss Thornton, is that Pine Hollow needs stability and competent leadership in its institutions. The school is no exception." He paused, then added with deliberate casualness, "I hear Caleb Morgan is back in town. I believe you had a prior arrangement with him." The seemingly offhand remark caught Eliza off guard, like a sudden blow. "Any arrangement I had with Mr. Morgan was terminated by him," she replied, her voice sharper than she intended. "Arrangements can be revived," Mr. Townsend said, his tone smooth as a salesman's pitch. "Morgan is a major landowner, a respected taxpayer. His word carries weight in this community. If you were to reconsider returning to him, the board might view your position more leniently." His intent was as clear as sunlight on snow. This wasn't just a threat but a coordinated scheme. Mr. Townsend wanted to shield his son from consequences, and Caleb Morgan, somehow, was part of a plan to pressure her into abandoning teaching and resuming her role as a mail-order bride. Eliza felt a surge of anger but restrained it, knowing losing her temper would only please Mr. Townsend. "I appreciate your concern for my future, Mr. Townsend," she said, not hiding her sarcasm, "but my personal affairs are irrelevant to my professional competence." Everything is connected in a small community like this, Miss Thornton, he replied, settling his hat back on with a smooth motion. Surely you've realized that. The board meets at 2. Good day. After he left, Eliza sank into her chair, trembling with a mix of rage and despair. In 24 hours, the life she'd carefully built in Pine Hollow began to crumble. Her teaching position, which gave her purpose and independence, was threatened by a powerful man protecting his son. Caleb Morgan's return reopened a wound she thought had healed, like a dagger twisting in her pride. Even her health, much improved thanks to Doc Bennett's care, felt precarious as anxiety tightened her chest, making breathing harder. Doc Bennett. The thought of him steadied her somewhat. He would know what to do, or at least offer the clear perspective she desperately needed. Grabbing her wool coat and hat, Eliza locked the classroom door and headed to his clinic on Main Street, her boots crunching in fresh snow. She breathed the cold air, trying to calm her mind, but each step felt heavier, as if she were walking into a battle she wasn't ready for. Main Street was livelier now, shopkeepers sweeping porches, early patrons navigating slippery walkways, and a group of children playing snowball fights near the blacksmiths. She was halfway to the clinic when a figure stepped into her path, tall and disturbingly familiar. Caleb Morgan, looking more rested than the image she'd conjured from his letters, but his eyes held a determination that put her on guard. "Miss Thornton," he greeted with a slight nod, his voice deep and confident, like a man accustomed to giving orders. "I thought we might continue our conversation, perhaps over breakfast at the Silver Star Hotel's dining room." "I'm afraid I have other business, Mr. Morgan," Eliza replied stiffly, trying to step past, but he subtly shifted to block her way, not touching her but clearly not letting her pass easily. "I spoke with Mr. Townsend this morning," he said, lowering his voice to avoid prying ears. "I understand your position at the school is precarious. A new teacher, a serious accident, the school board can hardly overlook that." Anger flared in Eliza's chest, hot and sharp. "So it was coordinated, Mr. Townsend's threats and Morgan's intervention, a calculated pressure to push her back to the original plan, as if she were a commodity to be returned and reclaimed at will." "My position is none of your concern, Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice louder than intended, drawing a few curious glances from passers-by. "And if you think I'd return to a man who rejected me over rumors of my health, you've misjudged me." Morgan's face darkened, but he kept his tone even. "I was wrong to judge your suitability hastily," he said, his voice carrying a hint of remorse, though Eliza suspected it was calculated rather than genuine. "I'm prepared to honor our original agreement. My home is ready, spacious and comfortable. A marriage license can be secured today, and you'd have a stable, respected life as the wife of a prominent landowner." "Mr. Morgan," Eliza interrupted, no longer caring who overheard, "I appreciate that you've reassessed my suitability, but I haven't reassessed mine of you. Your letter made your character clear, a man who values health over heart, land over people. That you now find me acceptable because my health has improved only confirms that judgment." Her words cut like a blade, and for a moment she saw a flicker of hurt cross Morgan's face, but it was quickly masked by familiar arrogance. "You're being unreasonable, Miss Thornton," he said, his voice hardening. "Our arrangement was mutually beneficial. It still can be. But think carefully. Pine Hollow is a small pond. Without your teaching position, your options here are limited. Very limited." She didn't reply, only pushed past him, her shoulder nearly brushing his as she continued, head high though her heart pounded. His words stung because they held some truth. Without teaching, she'd rely on sewing or worse, become a burden on Margaret or Doc Bennett's kindness. But she'd rather face uncertainty than sell herself to a man who didn't see her true worth. Confrontation at the clinic. Eliza reached Doc Bennett's clinic, a small wooden building at the end of Main Street with a simple sign reading Dr. S. Bennett, Apothecary. Inside, the space was clean and orderly, with wooden shelves lined with jars, medical books, and instruments, from a stethoscope to small surgical tools. The scent of herbs, beeswax, and a hint of iodine hung in the air, creating an atmosphere both scientific and comforting. Doc Bennett emerged from the treatment room as she entered, looking tired but cautiously pleased. His shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing strong forearms. "Ethan?" she asked immediately, anxious for the injured student. "Awake and coherent," he replied, his weary face softening into a faint smile. "Asking for his mother and complaining the light hurts his eyes. Both good signs. The next few days will tell us more, but I'm more optimistic than yesterday. The boy's tough and Mrs. Larson's with him." "Thank God," Eliza exhaled, genuine relief washing over her. Whatever happened to her, at least Ethan would recover, a small victory amid the storm. Doc Bennett studied her face more closely, his gaze as sharp as when examining a patient. "But you didn't come just for news on Ethan," he said, not a question but a statement. "What's happened?" She quickly recounted the conversations with Mr. Townsend and Caleb Morgan, striving for objectivity but her voice trembling when she reached Morgan's final threat. "They're working together," she concluded, pacing the small waiting area, her boots clicking on the wooden floor. "Mr. Townsend wants to protect Jacob from consequences, and Morgan wants to reclaim his investment, me. I'm just a pawn in their calculations, an obstacle to be removed or coerced." "You're no such thing," Doc Bennett said firmly, stepping closer, his voice carrying a certainty that halted her. "And neither of them has as much power as they think. Townsend may be the banker, but he's not Pine Hollow's king. And Morgan, he's just a landowner with an ego bigger than his ranch." Eliza shook her head, frustration making it hard to stay composed. "The school board meets this afternoon, without the colonel to balance the vote. Mr. Townsend said he's ill. It'll be just him and Reverend Harper, and I'm certain Townsend will sway the Reverend to terminate my contract." Doc Bennett tilted his head, his eyes glinting with determination. "Then we ensure the colonel attends," he said, his voice calm as if proposing an obvious solution. "Mr. Townsend said he has gout, that he can't walk," Eliza countered, though part of her wanted to believe in his confidence. "Mild gout," Doc Bennett corrected, his tone carrying dry humor. "I've been treating the colonel for it for a month. It's uncomfortable, certainly, but hardly incapacitating, especially when he knows the town needs him. I think I'll check on my patient this morning and mention a few developments in town, like the school board trying to meet without him." Hope flared in Eliza's chest, but she tamped it down, fearing it might vanish like morning mist. "Even if the colonel attends, the vote will be tied 2-2, she said, trying to anticipate outcomes. Doc Bennett smiled, a small but meaningful expression. "The school board charter stipulates that a tie is decided by a special vote of 3 respected community members who have no children in the school and are landowners or taxpayers. I believe Mrs. Sullivan, Abigail Harper, and Mr. Gardner qualify. They're fair-minded, and none of them take kindly to Townsend trying to bulldoze others." Eliza stared at him, astonished by his knowledge. "How do you know the school board charter's details?" she asked, unable to hide her curiosity. "I make a point to understand how important institutions are run," he replied simply, as if it were obvious. Knowledge is the best shield against arbitrary power. Townsend may think he holds all the cards, but Pine Hollow doesn't run on one man's whims. Before she could respond, the clinic door burst open, bringing a gust of cold air and a panicked young man, whom Eliza recognized as one of the miners who'd helped carry Ethan after his fall. "Doc," he gasped, breathless from running, his leather coat caked with snow. "Come quick. Fire at the assay office." Doc Bennett instantly grabbed his medical bag, an old but well-kept leather satchel filled with vials and tools. "Anyone hurt?" he asked, his voice sharp but not panicked. "Not sure yet," the man replied, his voice trembling. "Fire's everywhere. They're trying to stop it from spreading to the general store next door, but the wind's bad." Without hesitation, Doc Bennett turned to Eliza. "Mrs. Larson is with Ethan in the treatment room. Tell her I've been called away, but will return as soon as possible. If Ethan shows changes, confusion, trouble speaking, increased pain, have someone fetch me immediately." Eliza nodded, understanding the trust he placed in her. "Go. I'll watch him." As Doc Bennett hurried off with the miner, Eliza stepped through the curtain into the treatment room, a small space with an iron bed, a wooden table, and a shelf of remedies. Mrs. Larson looked up from her chair beside Ethan's bed, her face haggard with exhaustion but brightening with relief at seeing Eliza. The boy was awake, pale but alert, his head neatly bandaged, his eyes wide though still dazed. "Miss Thornton," Ethan whispered, his voice slightly slurred but recognizable, a positive sign that lightened Eliza's heart. "Hello, Ethan," she said gently, sitting in the other chair. "Doc Bennett was called away for an emergency, but he'll be back soon. How do you feel?" "Head hurts," he replied, wincing as he tried to sit up. "Light's too bright makes my eyes ache." "That's normal," she reassured, recalling Doc Bennett's words. "You took quite a fall, but you're doing well. Just rest and we'll take care of you." She turned to Mrs. Larson, who clutched her son's hand tightly. "Doc Bennett said these are good signs. His coherence, sensitivity to light, both show his brain is functioning normally." Mrs. Larson nodded, relief evident on her weary face. "He knew my name right when he woke," she said, her voice trembling. "Remembered his siblings' names too, and our dog back home. But," she hesitated, lowering her voice so Ethan wouldn't hear, "he remembers exactly what happened. Jacob Townsend wasn't playing. He pushed Ethan on purpose after mocking his father's disability from the mine collapse. Ethan tried to walk away like you taught, but Jacob followed and shoved him hard." Anger flared in Eliza again, hot and sharp, but she suppressed it for Ethan's sake. She taught her students how to handle conflicts, walk away, find an adult, stay calm. But Jacob had crossed every line, and his father's cover-up only worsened things. "We'll deal with that later," she said, her voice gentle but resolute. "For now, let's focus on getting Ethan well, young man." She'd barely settled into the chair when noise erupted outside, shouts, running feet, and the town's fire bell ringing urgently, a sound distinct to frontier towns where fires could destroy everything in hours. "Sounds bad," Mrs. Larson whispered, glancing toward the curtain door, her hands tightening on Ethan's. "Doc Bennett said there's a fire at the assay office," Eliza explained, striving to keep her voice calm. "They're trying to contain it, but it seems serious." The fire and the escape, the scream grew closer, and a sharp, acrid smell of smoke began to seep into the clinic, jolting Eliza to her feet. She rushed to the front window, pulling back the curtain to assess the situation, and what she saw turned her blood cold. The assay office was engulfed in flames, fire shooting from its windows and roof like a ravenous beast, devouring everything in its path. Worse, the blaze had spread to the neighboring building, Mr. Gardner's general store, and sparks were flying dangerously close to surrounding structures, including the clinic. As she stared in horror, a strong gust of wind sent a shower of burning embers directly onto the clinic's shingle roof, and smoke began to rise from one corner. "Mrs. Larson," Eliza said, struggling to keep her voice calm despite her pounding heart, "we need to move Ethan now. The fire's spreading here." Mrs. Larson's face went ashen with fresh fear, her eyes wide. "Move him." But Doc Bennett said not to. Doc Bennett couldn't have foreseen the fire reaching the clinic, Eliza interrupted firmly, her voice carrying a certainty she hadn't known she possessed. "We need to get Ethan to safety, away from the fire right now." Outside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The general store's storefront was now fully ablaze, its red-orange flames illuminating the street. The town's men had formed a bucket brigade from the town well, pouring water onto the fire in a desperate effort, but the blaze seemed to mock them, spreading with terrifying speed. Thick black smoke obscured parts of the street, and small pops from burning wood rang out like gunshots. "Where do we take him?" Mrs. Larson asked, already gathering her son's meager belongings, a wool scarf and a pair of small boots. Her voice trembled, but she fought to stay composed for Ethan, who was watching his mother with anxious eyes. Eliza thought quickly, her mind racing through options. Mrs. Larson's home was on the far side of town, too distant to carry an injured boy in these conditions. Margaret's boarding house was closer, but still at risk if the wind shifted. "The schoolhouse," she decided, her voice resolute. "It has a stone foundation and a creek nearby, which will keep it safe from the fire." "Can Ethan walk?" The boy tried to sit up, wincing in pain, his small hands clutching the blanket. "I can try," he said weakly, but even that small effort left him gasping. "No," Eliza said, seeing his struggle. "We'll have to carry him." She scanned the clinic, spotting a narrow iron cot, light enough to serve as a makeshift stretcher. "Help me with this, Mrs. Larson." Together, they transferred Ethan to the cot, wrapping him tightly in blankets to shield him from the cold outside. The boy was light for his 12 years, but still too heavy for two women to carry far in smoke and snow. "We need help," Eliza said, her mind racing through possibilities. Most able-bodied men were likely fighting the fire, and the town's women were probably assisting elsewhere. As if answering her thoughts, the clinic door burst open, revealing Caleb Morgan, his face smudged with soot, his wool coat singed in places, his expression urgent. "Miss Thornton, the fire's spreading fast," he said, his voice carrying a rare urgency. "This whole block could go. You need to evacuate now." For the first time, Eliza was genuinely relieved to see him, if only for the circumstances. "Mr. Morgan, perfect timing," she said, her voice infused with newfound authority. "We need to get Ethan Larson to the schoolhouse. Can you help carry him?" Morgan blinked, momentarily surprised, as if he hadn't expected Eliza to issue orders, but he quickly assessed the situation and nodded. "I'll take one end," he said, stepping to the iron cot. "Mrs. Larson, you support his head. Miss Thornton, grab any medical supplies Doc Bennett might need for the boy." Efficient and commanding, Eliza had to admit, though she was loath to give him too much credit. Working quickly, she gathered bandages, Doc Bennett's pain tincture, clean cloth, and a bottle of distilled water from the medicine shelf. She stuffed them into a canvas bag, along with a few of Ethan's personal items, a handkerchief, and a small folding knife the boy cherished. Outside, the scene was even more chaotic. The fire had spread further, flames now visible on the roof of the building next to the clinic, and the heat was intense even from yards away. Thick smoke made breathing difficult, and Eliza pressed her handkerchief to her nose as she led the way. "This way," she called, directing them off the main street, following a winding path behind buildings to reach the schoolhouse, avoiding the heart of the blaze. The journey was slow and clumsy. Morgan bore most of Ethan's weight, with Mrs. Larson supporting the boy's head and shoulders, her hands trembling but steady. Eliza went ahead, clearing the path by kicking aside small snowdrifts and watching for hazards, from fallen branches to debris from the fire. They had just rounded the final building on the block when a loud crash sounded behind them. Turning, they saw the general store's roof collapse entirely, sending a fountain of sparks and burning debris into the sky. Some of this fiery rain landed on the clinic's roof, immediately producing ominous smoke. "Faster," Morgan urged, picking up the pace despite the clear strain of carrying Ethan, sweat streaming down his forehead in the cold. When they reached the schoolhouse, all four were gasping from exertion, smoke, and the terror of their narrow escape. Eliza fumbled with the key, her cold fingers clumsy with urgency, but finally unlocked the door. Inside, the classroom was cool and blessedly quiet after the inferno they'd fled, the scent of polished wood and chalk dust offering a sense of normalcy amid the crisis. Morgan gently set Ethan onto two student desks pushed together, while Mrs. Larson immediately checked on her son, wiping sweat from his brow and whispering reassurances. "He's all right," she reported, her voice thick with relief. "No new bleeding, no more confusion. He's just exhausted." Eliza leaned against the teacher's desk, the adrenaline that had carried her through the evacuation beginning to fade, leaving her with exhaustion and a faint ache in her chest. "Thank God," she whispered, closing her eyes for a moment to steady herself. Morgan stood awkwardly nearby, his usual commanding demeanor tempered by uncertainty. "I should get back," he said at last, his voice tinged with hesitation. "They need every hand to fight the fire. The bucket brigade is working, but the blaze is still strong." "Of course," Eliza nodded, regarding him with a reluctant new respect. "And thank you, Mr. Morgan. We couldn't have gotten Ethan out without you." He gave a curt nod, then hesitated, as if wanting to say more. "For what it's worth, Miss Thornton," he began, his voice lower, "I was wrong about you. Whatever passed between us, I was wrong to judge your strength. You've proven that today, and every day since you arrived in Pine Hollow." The unexpected admission caught Eliza off guard, and for a moment she saw a different Caleb Morgan, not the cold man who wrote the rejection letter, but one capable of remorse, however belated. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice sincere but not inviting further discussion. "Be careful out there." He nodded again, donned his hat, and left, striding back toward the burning town center with the determined energy she'd seen in him during Ethan's evacuation. "You've got an admirer there," Mrs. Larson remarked, still focused on Ethan, but her voice held a teasing note. "First Doc Bennett, now Mr. Morgan. Quite a change from being left at the station, isn't it?" Eliza felt her cheeks warm, unrelated to the distant fire. "Doc Bennett and I are colleagues," she said carefully, though the words seemed inadequate to describe the bond forming between them. "And Mr. Morgan and I had an arrangement that ended before it began." Mrs. Larson's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced, but she didn't press. "If you say so, Miss Thornton. But I've lived in frontier towns long enough to recognize when a man looks at a woman as more than a colleague." Before Eliza could protest, the schoolhouse door opened again, revealing Doc Bennett, his medical bag in hand, streaked with soot, his face radiating relief at the sight of them. "Thank God," he exhaled, stepping inside and closing the door against the smoke. "When I saw the clinic threatened, I feared." He trailed off, visibly steadying himself, then continued. "Mrs. Larson, Ethan, you're both safe. Miss Thornton, you acted quickly. Well done. Thanks to Miss Thornton, Mrs. Larson replied, her eyes full of gratitude. She organized the evacuation just in time. The clinic's roof caught fire as we left. Doc Bennett's eyes found Eliza's, holding something more complex than gratitude, respect perhaps, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Quick thinking, he said, his voice low but earnest. Though I'd expect nothing less from you. He moved to check on Ethan, his hands gently examining the boy's bandages and pupils, his movements precise yet tender, like a father tending to his child. No worse for the journey, it seems, he concluded, his voice tinged with satisfaction. You're a tough one, Ethan Larson. Will the town burn down? Ethan asked, his voice small with worry, his eyes wide as he looked at Doc Bennett. Not if we can help it, he reassured, resting a comforting hand on the boy's shoulder. The bucket brigade is holding the fire at the general store. The assay office is gone, I'm afraid, and likely my clinic. But the rest can be saved if the wind doesn't shift. Your medicines, your equipment, Eliza began, her heart aching for what he stood to lose. She knew the clinic was the center of his life, housing not just remedies but his notes, medical books, and memories of patients he'd saved. I saved the essentials, he said, patting his medical bag, his voice steady though Eliza sensed the loss beneath it. The rest can be replaced. Lives can't. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the schoolhouse window they saw a group approaching, Colonel Rutherford, leaning heavily on his cane but moving with a soldier's determination. Reverend Harper, his clerical collar askew, and, surprisingly, Mr. Townsend, looking distinctly uncomfortable, as if dragged there against his will. Looks like the school board meeting has changed venues, Doc Bennett remarked dryly, his eyes glinting with a small spark of triumph. The confrontation at the schoolhouse. The schoolhouse had never held such tension. Colonel Rutherford, Reverend Harper, and Mr. Townsend stood in an awkward semicircle near the door, while Eliza, Doc Bennett, Mrs. Larson, and Ethan formed an unintended opposing group at the front of the room. Outside, the distant shouts and sounds of firefighting, splashing water, cracking wood, and calls among the bucket brigade provided a chaotic backdrop to this impromptu meeting. Miss Thornton, Colonel Rutherford spoke first, his military bearing somewhat diminished by the cane he leaned on, but his voice still commanding, as it had been when he led troops. Doc Bennett informed me of the irregular proceedings planned for this afternoon. I deemed it necessary to attend, despite my physician's advice to rest. He shot Doc Bennett a pointed glance, and the doctor merely nodded, his expression neutral but his eyes betraying a hint of satisfaction. I believe, the colonel continued, that recent events, including the ongoing fire, may necessitate reevaluating the matter at hand. A teacher threatened with dismissal without a hearing, while the town faces a crisis, is unacceptable. Mr. Townsend stepped forward, clearly displeased with the turn of events, his thin lips pursed. Colonel, with all due respect, this is hardly the time or place for a formal board meeting. The town is burning, literally. We should focus on saving property and lives. Yet you found time to threaten Miss Thornton's position this morning, Mrs. Larson interjected sharply, her maternal protectiveness extending to Eliza, who had saved her son. Before the fire, before any emergency, you were ready to dismiss her without giving her a chance to defend herself, all to protect Jacob. Mr. Townsend's face flushed, but he tried to maintain a calm tone. That's a board matter, Mrs. Larson, not. It became my matter when your son pushed my boy down an embankment and nearly killed him, she retorted, her voice rising, echoing in the small room. Then you tried to cover it up by getting rid of the one person demanding accountability, a teacher who's worked tirelessly for our children, who saved my son from the fire today. Ethan stirred on his makeshift bed, his eyes wide despite his weakness. "It's true," he said, his voice faint but clear, each word like a stone dropped into the silence. "Jacob said my pa was a useless drunk after the mine collapse. Said our family was a charity case, living off the town's pity. I tried to walk away like Miss Thornton taught us, but he kept following, taunting me. Then he pushed me hard, said maybe I'd end up crippled like my pa." The boy's simple testimony hung in the air, his pale face and bandaged head a silent, undeniable proof. Reverend Harper, silent until now, stepped forward, his expression troubled, as if the weight of the boy's words pressed heavily on his shoulders. "These are serious allegations against your son, Mr. Townsend," he said, his voice gentle but carrying an undeniable gravity. "Boys fight," Mr. Townsend dismissed, but his confidence wavered, his voice lower as if trying to convince himself. Boys will be held accountable for their actions," Colonel Rutherford cut in firmly, his voice sharp as a blade. "As will adults who try to obscure the truth to protect them. A teacher doing her duty, reporting facts based on witnesses, cannot be punished for it." Doc Bennett, who had been quietly checking Ethan's pulse, spoke into the tense silence, his voice neutral but carrying a natural authority. "Perhaps," he suggested mildly, "we should address the immediate concerns. Ethan needs rest, the town needs every hand fighting the fire, and the school board clearly has urgent business regarding Miss Thornton's position. But I propose any decision follow due process, a full hearing, with all parties involved, including parents like Mrs. Larson." "There is no urgent business," Colonel Rutherford declared, his gaze locking onto Mr. Townsend. "Any review of Miss Thornton's contract will follow formal procedure, including a public hearing. I'll see to it, even if I have to limp to every meeting on this cane." Reverend Harper nodded in agreement, his expression softening as he looked at Eliza. "That seems fair, especially given." He gestured vaguely toward Ethan, as if reluctant to dwell on the boy's condition in his presence. Mr. Townsend opened his mouth to object, his lips tightening, but at that moment the schoolhouse door burst open, revealing Caleb Morgan, his coat dusted with snow and ash, his face bearing fresh soot marks, but his eyes alight with significant news. "The fire's contained," he announced, his voice carrying through the small room. "The assay office and general store are lost. Doc's clinic is damaged but not fully burned. The bucket brigade is still working, but the risk of spreading is over." His gaze lingered on Eliza for a moment, carrying a newfound respect, before sweeping over the school board. "Didn't mean to interrupt official business," he said, his voice tinged with fatigue but retaining its commanding edge. "Not at all, Mr. Morgan," Colonel Rutherford replied with formal courtesy, though his eyes were sharp. "In fact, your timing is impeccable. I understand you recently expressed renewed interest in Miss Thornton regarding a prior arrangement." Morgan shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting to be addressed directly in front of the board. "That's a private matter between me and Miss Thornton," he said, his voice edged with defensiveness. "Under normal circumstances, I'd agree," the colonel continued, undeterred, his voice carrying the precision of a man who'd interrogated opponents. "However, when personal arrangements intersect with public institutions like the school, clarity benefits everyone. Did you propose that Miss Thornton relinquish her teaching position to resume your original agreement?" Eliza stepped forward, unwilling to be discussed as if absent, though her heart pounded. "Colonel Rutherford, I appreciate your concern," she said, her voice steady, "but Mr. Morgan is correct in one respect. My personal decisions are my own. I declined his proposal as I made clear this morning." Morgan looked at her, his expression complex, a mix of disappointment, respect, and perhaps a touch of regret. Miss Thornton has made her position clear, he said, his voice low but distinct. I won't press further. But as a Pine Hollow citizen, I'll say this town needs teachers like her, ones who don't just teach but act in a crisis like today. The unexpected praise caught Eliza off guard, but she only nodded, unwilling to prolong the topic. Colonel Rutherford gave a faint smile, as if he'd achieved his aim. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Morgan, he said. And the board appreciates your efforts today in the fire. Pine Hollow values citizens who step up in a crisis. Mr. Townsend, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke, his voice carrying clear reluctance. If the board agrees to defer any decision on Miss Thornton, I won't object, he said, his eyes avoiding Eliza's. But we need a full investigation into the incident with Jacob and Ethan with all witnesses. Agreed, Reverend Harper said promptly, his voice tinged with relief. And I propose inviting Mrs. Larson and other students as witnesses to ensure fairness. Before the discussion could continue, a new commotion arose outside, rapid footsteps and a young, panicked voice. Jacob Townsend burst into the schoolhouse, his usually neat appearance disheveled, his hair wild, his face streaked with tears and soot. He froze upon seeing the adults, his expression shifting rapidly from desperation to confusion, like a deer caught in lamplight. Pa, he gasped, seemingly oblivious to the room's tension. They're saying it's my fault, about the fire. Mr. Townsend's demeanor shifted instantly from defensive to alarmed, stepping forward to grip his son's shoulders. What nonsense is this? You weren't near the fire. You were home all day yesterday. I was, Jacob admitted, his voice breaking, tears streaming down his dirty face. Not when it started, but I knew. I saw Tommy and Billy playing with matches behind the assay office yesterday. They said they were just burning some trash for fun, but I knew they shouldn't. And I didn't say anything. You didn't say anything, Reverend Harper asked, his usually gentle voice sharp with shock, as if he couldn't believe a boy would stay silent about such a dangerous act. Jacob's face crumpled, his head bowing as if he couldn't bear the adults' gazes. I didn't think they'd really do it, he said, his voice trembling. And after the thing with Ethan, I didn't want more trouble. I was scared I'd get punished. But now people are saying because I pushed Ethan, I'm responsible for the fire too. The revelation struck the small room like a blow, silencing everyone. Eliza looked not at Jacob but at Mr. Townsend, watching his face as he processed what his son had just revealed. For the first time since meeting him, the man's calculated veneer cracked, exposing genuine pain beneath. The pain of a father realizing his son had gone too far, and that he might have contributed to it by covering up. Jacob, he began, his voice catching, then seemed at a loss for words, his hands tightening on the boy's shoulders. Doc Bennett spoke into the tense silence, his voice neutral but authoritative, like a mediator navigating the line between emotion and reason. The fire's cause will be properly investigated, he said, his gaze sweeping over Mr. Townsend and Jacob. For now, Jacob's knowledge could help identify remaining hazards, like hidden embers or flammable areas. Mr. Townsend, perhaps you should take your son to Sheriff Mason. His information could prevent further damage, and that will be noted in the investigation. It was a graceful exit for both Townsends, a way to leave without complete disgrace, and after a moment's hesitation, Mr. Townsend gave a stiff nod. Come on, Jacob, he said, his voice low and weary. We've got things to sort out. As they left, Reverend Harper turned to Eliza, his expression solemn but sincere. Miss Thornton, I believe I owe you an apology, he said, his voice carrying a rare humility for a man in his position. It seems I was ready to judge without full information. a mistake my role as a pastor should have taught me to avoid. We all make mistakes, Reverend, Eliza replied, her voice gentle but firm. What matters is being willing to correct them when new truths come to light. I only want what's best for the students, including Jacob. He needs guidance, not just punishment. Caleb Morgan, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, shifted his weight, drawing attention to himself. If the school board is done here, he said, his voice tinged with fatigue, I should return to assist with the fire efforts. There's much to do to protect what remains. Of course, Colonel Rutherford nodded, his tone carrying respect for a man who had stepped up in a crisis. And the board appreciates your assistance today, Mr. Morgan. Pine Hollow values citizens who rise when the town needs them. Morgan nodded, his gaze finding Eliza again, carrying a sincerity she hadn't expected. Miss Thornton, when you have time, there are matters we should discuss without an audience, he said, his voice low but not coercive. I'll find you later, Eliza promised, her tone making it clear that later would be on her terms, not his. She didn't want to shut the door on him entirely, not after his help with Ethan, but she wasn't ready to let him back into her life as if nothing had happened. After Morgan and Reverend Harper left to aid the firefighting efforts, only Colonel Rutherford remained from the school board. He settled into a chair at Eliza's desk, his gout-afflicted legs stretched out, his cane propped against the wall. Quite a day for Pine Hollow, he remarked dryly, his eyes glinting with a hint of humor despite the gravity of events. And for you in particular, Miss Thornton. Quite an event, she agreed, suddenly aware of her exhaustion. Between the emotional confrontation with Mr. Townsend, Caleb Morgan's reappearance, the fire, and Ethan's evacuation, she'd been running on adrenaline for hours, and now her body was feeling the toll. Doc Bennett seemed to notice her fatigue. Mrs. Larson, Ethan should be moved to a more comfortable place once the town stabilizes, he said, his voice gentle but practical. Your home is likely best, or your sister's if you need support. My sister's is closer, Mrs. Larson replied, her voice carrying a touch of relief at knowing her son was out of danger. She was a nurse. She can help me watch him tonight. Good, Doc Bennett nodded. I'll arrange transport when it's safe to move him. He turned to Eliza, his gaze kind but resolute. You should rest too. Smoke inhalation can worsen respiratory conditions, even if you're responding well to treatment. I'll check on you later, but for now, drink water and lie down if you can. Colonel Rutherford stood with a wince, grasping his cane. I should check on my wife, he said, his voice tinged with concern. She worries when the town's in upheaval, and I don't want her hearing rumors before I'm home. He paused at the door, looking back at Eliza with a rare smile. The school board will meet properly next week to address recent events, he said. But you should know, Miss Thornton, your position is secure. In fact, I believe a formal commendation may be in order for your courage and quick thinking today. After he left, the schoolhouse fell into a weary silence, broken only by Ethan's soft breathing and Mrs. Larson's faint snores, as she dozed off in a student chair beside her son, still holding his hand even in sleep. They both need proper rest, Doc Bennett said quietly, his gaze softening as he looked at them. So do you, Eliza. Eliza nodded, moving to the window where the smoke had thinned, and organized activity replaced earlier chaos. Men cleared debris, securing damaged structures to ensure no hidden embers sparked new fires. The late afternoon light streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the wooden floor, creating a scene both peaceful and somber after the firestorm. Your clinic, she said suddenly, recalling his loss. You said it was damaged. What will you do? The roof and back wall took the worst, he replied, his voice calm but tinged with regret. The front rooms are mostly smoke-damaged, but intact. Critical medicines were stored in metal cases, so I saved most of them. Books and notes may be partially lost, but structures can be rebuilt. Pine Hollow has survived worse. Eliza looked at him, struck by his resilience. "Aren't you upset?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. "The clinic is your life's work." He gave a faint smile, stepping to stand beside her at the window, close enough that she felt his steady presence, though they didn't touch. "I'm upset," he admitted, his voice honest. "But I learned long ago that material things can be replaced. Lives can't. Today no one died. Ethan's recovering. The town will rebuild. That's what matters." His simple words carried a depth beyond physical possessions, and Eliza realized he was speaking to a philosophy of life, forged through war, loss, and years of healing others. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "For intervening with the school board, for treating Ethan, for everything. I don't know what I'd have done without you today." "You'd have managed without my interference," he replied, his voice lightly teasing, as if he truly believed in her strength. "You're remarkably capable, Eliza Thornton, more than you realize. Today, you didn't just save Ethan, you stood your ground against Townsend and Morgan. Not everyone could do that." His use of her full name with quiet confidence made her eyes sting unexpectedly. She blinked the tears away, unwilling to let emotion overwhelm her. "What will you do about Caleb Morgan now?" Doc Bennett asked after a moment, his voice carefully neutral, as if gauging her response. Eliza considered the question, gazing out at the town through the window. "Hear him out, I suppose," she replied, her voice tinged with fatigue. "He helped with Ethan today, and I don't want to hold grudges. But if you're asking whether I'd consider his renewed offer, the answer is no. I didn't come west to be anyone's convenient solution, not his, not anyone's." Something shifted in Doc Bennett's expression, a softening, perhaps relief, though he masked it well. "Good," he said simply, and the word carried more weight than its brevity suggested. They stood in companionable silence, as the late afternoon light continued to cast long shadows through the schoolhouse window, creating streaks of gold and orange across the polished wooden floor. Outside, the noise of firefighting had subsided, replaced by the steady sounds of Pine Hollow's residents beginning to clear, salvage what remained from the wreckage. Eliza stood beside Doc Bennett, feeling his solid presence like an anchor amid the emotional storm of the day. Though she'd known him less than 2 days, he'd become an integral part of the new story she was writing in the West, a story no longer centered on Caleb Morgan or others' expectations, but on herself, on the strength she was discovering within. "What will you do now?" she asked, turning to him, her eyes curious but sincere. "The clinic's damaged, and the town will need you more than ever. Yet you speak as if everything will be fine, no matter how great the loss." Doc Bennett looked out the window, his gaze sweeping over Pine Hollow's remaining rooftops, where smoke still rose from the assay office and general store's ashes. "I'll rebuild," he replied, his voice carrying an unshowy resolve. "It's not the first time I've started over. After the war, I had nothing but a bag of clothes and a few old medical books. Pine Hollow gave me a chance, and I won't abandon it, no matter how many times fire burns through." The resilience in his words stirred deep respect in Eliza, but also curiosity about the man himself. "Have you ever thought of leaving?" she asked, her voice soft but carrying rare sincerity. "Going somewhere easier like Denver or San Francisco, where you could open a big clinic with modern equipment and patients who pay well." He smiled, A faint but weary smile, as if her question touched something he'd long considered. "There was a time I thought about it," he admitted, his gaze returning to her, carrying unmasked honesty. "After the war, I wanted to run from memories, from what I'd done and seen. But I learned running doesn't heal. Only action, only helping others does that. Pine Hollow, with all its roughness and challenges, is where I found purpose. The people here don't need a flashy doctor with diplomas on the wall. They need someone willing to ride through a blizzard, to treat a child's fever, or sit all night with an injured miner. I'm that person." His words, simple yet profound, left Eliza silent for a moment, reflecting on her own journey. She'd come west for a new life, but hadn't expected that life to be more than material stability, a greater purpose, a chance to be part of a community, to contribute, to be valued for who she was. "I think I'm starting to understand why you stay," she said finally, her voice soft but certain. "Pine Hollow isn't just a town. It's a family in a way." "Exactly," Doc Bennett replied, his eyes bright with understanding. "And you're becoming part of that family, whether you realize it or not. Today you proved it, not just with Ethan, but in how you stood up to Townsend and Morgan. Pine Hollow's people will remember that." Eliza felt warmth spread through her chest, not from his medicine, but from his words, from the faith he placed in her. But before she could respond, a soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It opened to reveal Caleb Morgan once more, hat in hand, looking wearier but still commanding. His coat was now streaked with soot, and a large scorch mark on his sleeve showed he'd been close to the flames. "Miss Thornton," he said, his voice low and cautious, as if weighing each word. "May I come in?" Eliza glanced at Doc Bennett, who gave a slight nod, his expression neutral but alert. "Briefly," she replied, gesturing to a student desk near where she stood. "Mrs. Larson and Ethan need rest." Morgan nodded, stepping inside but keeping his distance, as if sensing the invisible boundary between them. He glanced at the Larsons, then turned back to Eliza, his eyes carrying a sincerity absent from their morning confrontation. "I won't take much time," he began, turning his hat in his hands, a rare nervous gesture for a man so self-assured. "I just wanted to say, I made a grave mistake with that letter. I judged you unfairly, based on second-hand reports of your health, and I let fear of Montana winters override reason. Today, I saw you organize an evacuation under dangerous conditions, stand firm against unwarranted accusations from Townsend, and hold your dignity throughout. I was wrong and I own that." The plain admission cost him some pride, and Eliza found herself respecting the effort, if not the man. She stood taller, her gaze meeting his unflinching. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice sincere but not inviting. "Your apology means something, and I appreciate your help with Ethan today. But you need to understand, I'm not the woman in those letters anymore. I've changed, and what I want for my life has changed too." Morgan nodded slowly, as if he'd anticipated her answer but needed to hear it. "My offer stands if you're interested," he said, his voice low but not pressing. "The house is built, the land is good, and I believe we could make a reasonable partnership based on mutual respect. But if you decline, I won't push further. I just wanted you to know you have options." Eliza studied him, weighing his words. The Caleb Morgan before her was indeed different from the man who'd rejected her by letter, more human, humbler in his way. But he wasn't offering love or deep understanding, only a reasonable partnership, a practical arrangement between two adults with complementary needs. Once that might have been enough. Once the security and honor of being a landowner's wife might have outweighed personal considerations. But now, after what she'd experienced in Pine Hollow, after finding purpose in teaching and strength in herself, she needed more. "I appreciate your offer," she said carefully, her voice steady despite surging emotions. "But I must decline. The woman who agreed to marry you sight unseen no longer exists. The woman I am now needs more, not just security, but purpose, respect, and a life I build myself." Morgan looked at her for a moment, his expression complex, disappointment but also growing respect. "I understand," he said finally, settling his hat back on. "I wish you well, Miss Thornton. Pine Hollow is lucky to have you, and I believe the town will see that more clearly after today." "I wish you well, Mr. Morgan," she replied, her voice genuine. "And thank you for everything you did today." He nodded once more, then left, his figure fading into the twilight, leaving Eliza with the sense that an old chapter had finally closed. She turned back to Doc Bennett, who'd remained silent during the exchange, his gaze observant but non-judgmental. "Do you think I was wrong to refuse him?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity, as if testing his reaction. "No," he answered promptly, his voice certain but gentle. "You chose your path, and it's the right one for you. Morgan might offer stability, but he doesn't see your true worth, not the way you've discovered it here." His words, simple yet profound, made Eliza smile, a small but genuine smile. "Thank you, Samuel," she said, using his first name for the first time, a small but meaningful step in their growing connection. He smiled back, his eyes warmer than the oil lamp's glow. "I should check on other patients," he said, gathering his medical bag. "The fire may have caused minor injuries needing attention, even with a damaged clinic. Will you be all right, staying with Ethan and Mrs. Larson?" "I'll be fine," she replied, her voice carrying newfound confidence. "I'll stay until they're safely moved." He paused at the door, turning back to her, his gaze carrying a sincerity that quickened her pulse. "Eliza," he began, then hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "When things settle, when the immediate crises pass, I'd like to talk to you about possibilities, not just your treatment but what might be between us." The deliberate ambiguity of possibilities held myriad potential meanings, but his eyes left no doubt about his true intent. Eliza felt her cheeks warm, but she held his gaze unflinching. "I'd like that," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "When the time comes, I'll be ready to talk about those possibilities." He nodded, a faint smile curving his lips, then left, his figure vanishing into the twilight, leaving Eliza with a mix of excitement and calm. She returned to the teacher's desk, absently organizing papers displaced when Ethan was laid on the makeshift bed, her mind replaying Doc Bennett's words, the careful way he said possibilities, the warmth in his eyes contrasting his usual professional demeanor. Something was growing between them, fragile but promising, like a seed planted in new soil. Spring in Pine Hollow. Spring arrived in Pine Hollow 3 weeks after the fire, bringing green shoots through thawing earth and the sun's warmth. Snow retreated to the Bitterroot Mountains' peaks, leaving meadows awash with wildflowers, purple lupines and yellow daisies, swaying in the breeze like a hymn to new life. In town, rebuilding progressed steadily, a testament to the West's indomitable spirit. Mr. Gardiner's general store rose from the ashes, grander with large glass windows reflecting sunlight. The assay office was rebuilt in stone rather than wood, a practical choice post-fire. Doc Bennett's clinic was restored with improvements he'd suggested, fire-assistant shingles, larger windows for light, and a dedicated storage room for medicines and books. Eliza's classroom, undamaged, had transformed too. New shelves, donated by grateful parents, brimmed with textbooks and literature, From *McGuffey's Reader* to a copy of *Moby Dick* gifted by Doc Bennett. An anatomical chart, also his gift, hung beside a U.S. map and a detailed Montana map, aiding her lessons about the land students called home. Most importantly, every desk was filled, even those once held by Jacob Townsend and other older students, initially resistant but gradually captivated by Eliza's teaching, a blend of firmness and inspiration. Jacob Townsend returned after a week's suspension, sobered by the near-tragic consequences of his actions. His apology to Ethan was awkward but seemingly sincere, accepted with youth's resilience, more focused on moving forward than holding grudges. He also performed community service, cleaning the schoolyard and aiding church repairs, as part of his punishment, and Eliza noticed a change, less aggression, more openness with classmates. His father, Mr. Townsend, underwent a quieter reckoning. His son's involvement in concealing the fire's origins shook his certainty, forcing him to confront the consequences of prioritizing power and reputation over principle. Though never warm with Eliza, he became civil, even supporting her request for additional school supplies at the latest town council meeting. Ethan Larson fully recovered, returning to class with a dramatic tale of his fall and the fire, making him a minor hero among peers. His father, still using a cane from a mine collapse 2 years prior, found work managing the rebuilt general store's inventory, a role better suited to his changed health and offering steadier income than mining. The Larson family, once scraping by, began rebuilding their lives, and Mrs. Larson became one of Eliza's staunchest supporters, often bringing homemade cornbread to the boarding house as thanks. For Eliza and Doc Bennett, now Samuel in private moments, their relationship had grown beyond doctor and patient. The conversation about possibilities he'd mentioned had unfolded, not once but through many meetings, from evenings at Margaret's boarding house, discussing books and ideas by the fireplace, to walks along the creek as weather warmed, sharing stories of pasts and dreams for the future. Today marked a milestone. For the first time since arriving in Pine Hollow, Eliza went a full week without a single cough. Doc Bennett declared her condition managed, if not cured, a cautious medical assessment rather than doubt about her improvement. To celebrate, he invited her on a picnic the first warm Saturday of spring, on a hillside overlooking Pine Hollow. They spread a wool blanket on the grass, beside a basket Margaret had prepared, sourdough bread, cheese, dried apples, and a jug of lemonade. In the sunlight, the town gleamed like a painting, new buildings shining, chimney smoke curling gently, and the Bitterroot Mountains standing sentinel in the distance, their peaks still snow-capped but foothills green with life. A partnership forged in Pine Hollow, the treatment has exceeded my expectations, Samuel remarked, watching her breathe the crisp mountain air without struggle, his eyes holding a rare satisfaction. Though I believe the patient's resilience contributes as much as the doctor's formula. You have a formidable spirit, Eliza. She smiled, accepting the compliment without letting it inflate her pride. A fortunate combination, it seems, she replied, plucking a purple lupine flower nearby, twirling it between her fingers. Like Pine Hollow itself. This town is a place of contrasts, yet they harmonize. The roughness of the mines, alongside the civilizing efforts of the church and school. A harsh climate, yielding the most beautiful spring flowers. A fire's crisis leading to stronger buildings. And people, Samuel added, his gaze locking onto hers, carrying a warmth that quickened her pulse. Colonel Rutherford's military precision, balanced by Abigail Harper's creativity. Margaret Sullivan's practical wisdom, beside Reverend Harper's spiritual guidance. And a Boston seamstress finding her place as a frontier teacher, That too, Eliza agreed, smiling at how he wove her into the town's tapestry. Though sometimes I wonder what might have happened if Caleb Morgan had met me at the station as planned. If he hadn't written that letter, Samuel considered, his eyes thoughtful, as if envisioning an alternate world. You might have married him, he said, his voice neutral but tinged with a hint of regret. Moved to his ranch, managed his household, perhaps raised a few children. Maybe found some contentment in time, as practical marriages often do. Perhaps, Eliza admitted, her voice soft but honest. But I wouldn't have discovered what I could do on my own. I wouldn't have built something truly mine. This classroom, these students, the sense that I'm making a difference. And I wouldn't have known I could be valued for my mind and spirit, not just my ability to keep a house or my health. And Pine Hollow would be much poorer for it, Samuel said, his voice low and earnest, his hand finding hers, grasping it with gentle but certain strength. As would I. The simple declaration held no flowery sentiment or grand promises, only an honest acknowledgement of what had grown between them, a bond not rooted in arrangements or convenience, but in deep understanding and mutual respect. Eliza thought it perfectly suited to him and to Pine Hollow, a place that needed no ornate words to prove its worth. I've been corresponding with a medical colleague in Denver, Samuel continued, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand, an intimate gesture that sent a slight shiver through her. He's intrigued by our success with your respiratory treatment. Believes it could help others with similar conditions, not just here but in major cities. That's wonderful, Eliza said sincerely, her eyes lighting with excitement. Your work deserves broader recognition. If it can help others as it has me, that would be a remarkable legacy. He suggested I document the formula and treatment process for publication in a medical journal, Samuel said, his voice carrying a rare note of enthusiasm. That means organizing notes, properly tracking outcomes with patients who have used variants of the treatment, possibly even traveling to Denver to present the findings. It's a significant undertaking and I'll need time, something I don't have much of, running between settlements. Eliza sensed where his thoughts were leading, and a small smile curved her lips. You'll need assistance, she said, her eyes meeting his, a playful glint in them. Someone organized, detail-oriented, familiar with the treatment, he agreed, his eyes bright with shared understanding. Someone who's experienced it firsthand, with a sharp mind and a knack for precise record-keeping. Someone whose insight and courage I've come to value above all else. His meaning was clear, and Eliza felt her heart race, not with anxiety but with a new kind of exhilaration. Are you offering me a position, Dr. Bennett? She asked, her voice tinged with mischief, though her eyes were earnest. I'm offering a partnership, he corrected gently, his voice low and warm. Professional, certainly, as you'd be ideal for helping with this project. But not only that. It hasn't been only that for a long time. He reached into his coat pocket, drawing out a small object, a carved wooden ring, its grain swirling in a spiral pattern that caught the afternoon light, like a miniature work of art. I'm not Caleb Morgan, he said softly, his voice carrying a sincerity that stole Eliza's breath. I can't offer you a sprawling ranch or material wealth. What I can offer is meaningful work, respect hard-earned, and a love that's grown not from arrangements but from genuine understanding, from moments like that night at Baxter's Station, like today in the fire, like every conversation where I realize how fortunate I am to have met you. Eliza looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, the quiet, capable healer who had seen her worth from their first meeting, who treated her as an equal rather than flawed goods, She took a deep breath, feeling the spring air fill her lungs without pain, a small miracle he'd helped her achieve. I'm not the woman who arrived at that station, hoping someone else would define her worth, she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within, her eyes locked on his. I don't need material wealth or grand promises. I need purpose, respect, and, she paused, searching for the right word, love given freely, not as charity or convenience but as a choice. A choice I make with both my heart and my mind. Samuel's smile transformed his stern face, reaching his eyes in a way that still made her heart skip. Then we understand each other perfectly, he said, his voice carrying unmasked relief and joy. As he slipped the wooden ring onto her finger, fitting perfectly, as she might have expected from his meticulous care, Eliza felt a peace she'd never known before. The ring, simple yet crafted with love, symbolized a promise not based on possession but on companionship, a commitment that they would face life's challenges together, as equals. It won't always be easy, Samuel cautioned, ever practical, his eyes tender but serious. Pine Hollow is still a frontier town, with harsh winters, mine accidents, and people sometimes more stubborn than the land itself. Your health, though improved, will need ongoing care. My work has its demands and setbacks, and the Denver project will pull me away from town at times. Life anywhere has demands and setbacks, Eliza replied, resting her hand on his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. What matters is facing them together, as equals by choice. I'm not afraid of hardship, Samuel. Not anymore. Not with you and Pine Hollow and myself. Below them, Pine Hollow hummed with its daily rhythm, the mine's shift whistle signaling a change, children playing in the schoolyard on a free Saturday, the newly rebuilt general store bustling with shoppers preparing for Easter. Eliza's gaze settled on the town that had become home, not through any arrangement but through the connections she'd forged, the respect she'd earned, the life she'd built from disappointment. The mail-order bride rejected for being too frail had found her place, not through marriage but through her own competence, discovered alongside a frontier apothecary who saw her value from the start. That he now offered marriage felt not like fulfilling an old plan, but like beginning a new one they would write together, step by step, breath by stronger breath. They sat there, hand in hand, watching the sunset fall over Pine Hollow, its golden-orange light painting the Bitterroot Mountains red. The spring breeze carried the scent of lupine and fresh grass, a reminder that even after the harshest winters, life bloomed anew. Eliza leaned her head against Samuel's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, and knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, not as landowner and bride, not as doctor and patient, but as two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and chosen to stay. Next up, you've got two captivating stories right on your screen. If this tale struck a chord with you, you won't want to miss them. Just click and dive in. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload from us.